So the Tim Burton one, Battle and Beneath, are tied for me for like the last place, and they each have something interesting going on for them that prevents them from being like fully written off as a movie. Like
Totally.
the Tim Burton one, the special effects are incredible. Like that,
next level insane. Yeah, that movie looks so good.
Yeah, like I just can't get over it. Like it's the only one that really sells with a prosthetics perspective how big the gorillas are relative to everyone else.
Right,
like, I think that's so incredible. The face work is incredible. The fact that they do really good stuff with like appendages and so forth.
I mean, it
like
helped that they put prosthetics on Michael Duncan, who's a giant.
Yes, a choice that I'm like, why is this the first time we're thinking
right.
of it? Like,
Yeah.
Like if the gorillas are supposed to be huge,
Lou
like,
Ferrigno was doing stuff back then. He could have been a gorilla.
Welcome to Certain POVs, Another Pass podcast with Case and Sam, where we take another look at movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Let's see how we could have fixed them.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
And today we are traveling forward and backwards through time in a circle. It's a big wheel.
It's the best wheel.
Is it the best wheel? I don't even know.
It's a banana wheel.
Sure. Today we are starting our conversation about the Planet of the Apes movies, and we're doing that in reverse. Today we are talking about the battle for the Planet of the Apes. And to have that conversation, we twisted the arm of Seth Decker.
Yeah, we threatened him with some large primates.
The Aldo hit squad popped by my house,
Exactly.
and I had no choice.
General Aldo.
General Aldo, yes, General. Yes.
General.
Seth, I'm so glad to finally get you on. We've been sort of podcast adjacent for a long time, and finally got a chance to meet over the summer, and I'm glad we have you on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's been kind of funny to be like ships passing in the night, like seeing each other's podcasts on social media, and now to be like, all right, it's time to combine. We can cross these lanes. We're making a chaotic swerve into one of the lanes of time. You know, there was
Right.
a lane where we didn't meet up.
No. Quantum
lane.
realities have split off, and because we made that choice to hang back 30 seconds, we have survived, and together are on this call.
And who knows what terrible things will befall us because of it.
Yeah. But for listeners who aren't familiar with any of the stuff that you're working on, Seth, who are you?
Hey, yeah, so I am a Maryland writer, director, and podcaster. I kind of take my free time away from my job editing to work on music videos and short films, and I'm currently in production or trying to get production going on on my first feature film, which, Case, you are one of our beloved benefactors of. You even got to show up to set for some of our first days of footage. Yeah, so that's what I do. I make movies, and I like to talk about movies professionally.
And you have had your podcast, Film Rescue, which is very similar to ours.
Yeah. It's funny how parallel thinking works. I saw the opportunity, and then as I looked for other podcasts, I think we launched our podcast within a couple months of each other too.
Probably.
So there was no way to like cross it over. It was just like we both thought it might be fun to look at old movies and see what we would pitch instead. Easy, fun premise. Like I would go as far as to congratulate you on having the idea, because I feel smart for having it myself.
I think the craziest part, though, is, as you mentioned, you're a Maryland person. We're actually, like, not that far. We live, 30 minutes from each other.
Yeah, exactly. It was so funny when you had donated to the Indiegogo, and I sent you an email, and you were like, oh, yeah, I'm, like, 20 minutes away. Yeah. I was like, what? How does this happen? Because we'd met through somebody, I think, that lives in Texas.
Yeah, it was a friend of the pod, JD.
Like, how does that happen?
Yeah. Just wild. It was like, oh, I love it. Well, I go there for coffee. I go there for coffee. We could meet for coffee.
And Sam, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited. I cannot wait to talk about this movie. I can't wait to hear all your thoughts on this movie. And I can't wait to hear your pitches, because I feel like I have a pitch, but I'm sure both of you are going to have much better. Case always has a very prepared pitch. And so I feel like maybe today I'll go first. So I feel like you'll both beat me.
Well, let's talk a minute about what we're doing here
Yeah.
and then the franchise in general. So it's been a while since we've taken on a full franchise. So we are doing the Planet of the Apes movies, the original ones. And we are going in reverse order. So today we are talking about the 5th Planet of the Apes movies and discussing what we would do assuming that the first 4 came out and you're kind of stuck with all the production behind the scenes stuff that was required of you at this point.
Right.
It's been a while since we've done that. Like our big one was we did the Star Wars movies in reverse. And I'm excited to talk about this one because just like I love this franchise so much. like it's one of my favorites.
Me too. Yeah, I like my dad is really into old westerns, old filmmaking. Something that he introduced me to at a young age was the original Planet of the Apes film, and just he was enthralled by how lifelike the masks were to him as a kid, and showing them to me, I was also just like, how are they doing this? And so from a really young age, I was really latched into practical effects, and that's something that's lasted through to this day. But this movie series is like the origin of me looking at things like this and going like, how would you do that? Like if I wanted to make a monkey mask, could I do that? That it was early formative stuff. Really, really important series to me. And then for the remakes to be as good as they have been, I feel really like spoiled for riches at this point because the remakes have been insanely good too. And so I'm like, I mean, you got some goofy ones, you got some good ones, you got some big budget, like modern blockbuster versions. You've got old, slower, like you've got everything. Everything is in this series. Everything.
Yeah, I mean, eventually we're going to talk about Escape, but like you get into like your 70s slice of life comedy at some point in this franchise.
Exactly.
Like, all right, cool.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, you mentioned the remakes that have come out. I wouldn't really consider them remakes so much as the other points on the fractured timeline that this weird time travel ape movie thing. Because like I have a headcanon that makes this whole thing work really well. Like the 8. I like obviously you have to throw out the Tim Burton movie because that's just not part of anything. Like it
Case
was a
is
Tim
getting
Burton-y.
so red right now. I would like the listeners to know that. I'd like to describe that he is getting red with embarrassment and explaining why he's throwing away the Tim Burton movie. Go on.
I mean, the Tim Burton one was one of our first episodes of the show.
Oh, wow.
So listeners should go back and check that one out because it was a really fun conversation with Jeff Moonen talking about that because the show launched around the time that War for the Planet of the Apes came out. So it made sense to do an episode at the time that was like kind of coming out. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But the Tim Burton one, like it just feels like the smattering of here's all these ideas that go into the franchise. Whereas if you look at the Andy Serkis ones, like they actually fit from a perspective for all of like as part of this whole like weird time travel story, because in Rise there's a point where or actually several points in the background where they talk about the Icarus shuttle, that they've lost contact with it and so forth.
Yeah.
So you can see that as like the actual starting point of the timeline. And then you go through those movies, then you go to the original Planet of the Apes movies, which is set in the future. And then you've got 2 movies set in that future timeline. And then you have apes from the future go back in time, and that creates a splintered timeline. But it also, one of the weird like continuity snarls of the original Planet of the Apes movies was like, all right, so Cornelius and Zira come back in time and they have a baby, and that explains why that there is a super smart ape in our time, but it doesn't explain why by the time you get to battle, everyone can fucking talk when it's only like 30 years in the future. It's like our past for us right now.
Right.
But it works if you understand that all the apes in the future had a virus that was causing them to become super intelligent. So the baby coming back and being around apes would actually make them all smarter over time.
Interesting.
Right. That makes sense because he would spread that virus.
And I think my one regret of the modern Planet of the Apes movies is that they don't have a note at some point that all the dogs and cats die by virtue of the virus that makes the apes smart. Because I think that would perfectly like cement all the things together.
Yeah.
Because like we know that virus happens between Escape and Conquest, where all the dogs and cats die, and all of a sudden the apes are smart enough at least to be slaves, and like they start coming close to talking. One kind of talks at the end, you get there, and then you get to this movie, and they're all fucking talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I don't understand why that would undo the need for the Tim Burton one to be like just a spin-off.
I mean,
universe.
it could just be some weird offshoot,
Yeah.
like way off out there, like in space. Oh, the apes are getting smarter. Why is that? Oh, well, I guess a monkey traveled back in time and it exposed us all to mind-advancing viruses, and that's all that. But it does feel like its own separate thing.
I want it to be in the orbit. I want it to be like, a planet X that can swing in through the solar system for a second.
Well, it's still like, so the Tim Burton one, Battle and Beneath, are tied for me for like the last place, and they each have something interesting going on for them that prevents them from being like fully written off as a movie. Like
Totally.
The Tim Burton one, the special effects are incredible. Like that,
next level insane. Yeah, that movie looks so good.
Yeah, I just can't get over it. Like, it's the only one that really sells with a prosthetics perspective how big the gorillas are relative to everyone else.
Right.
Like, I think that's so incredible. The face work is incredible. The fact that they do really good stuff with like appendages and so forth.
I mean, it helped that they put prosthetics on Michael Duncan, who's a giant.
Yes, a choice that I'm like, why is this the first time we're thinking
right.
of it? Like,
Yeah.
Like, if the gorillas are supposed to be huge,
Lou Ferrigno was doing stuff back then. He could have been a gorilla.
Well, like especially for the Planet of the Apes movies, like, why not just cast giant people and dub it? Because like, it's not like you can't, like, it's not like you're getting the audio from them in the performance.
Yeah.
Like,
Right. Yeah.
like, you're definitely dubbing at least a sizable amount of these because the prosthetics just make it difficult to talk.
Yeah, exactly.
So cast fucking basketball players.
Excellent point. Yeah. Never even thought about that. You're right. It's mostly dubbed. Go on.
Like, pull a Predator 2. Hire the basketball team to come out for, like, every time you need a couple shots where gorillas are standing next to anyone.
Right.
And then, like, just roll with that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But so Tim Burton, like, the special effects are incredible, but like the plot is nonsense, and all the dynamics are just like weird and funky. Beneath has its issues, and we'll talk about Beneath a lot when we get to it, but it was just always doomed to be the sequel to Planet of the Apes. Like, like, where do you go from that first one? I don't know, man. Like, what about fucking mutants? Like,
It's the logical next step. What are you talking about?
Well, and it's not unheard of because like the Jules Verne stories,
Oh yeah, like the center of the earth.
Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Journey to the Center of the Earth. That's it.
The time machine, like you've got, your kind of future people messing with monkey people and that. Like there's a lot of sci-fi crossover bake in Planet of the Apes just across like this movie, if you stop and look at it sideways, is kind of Dune. It's a little bit Dune. There's a lot of Dune in here.
Yeah. I was thinking about that today.
Yeah,
I was like,
there's a lot of political intrigue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not to spoil my pitch too much, I would lean into that more. If that's really where you want to go with this, I would lean into that a little bit more. It like the stuff that I like in Battle is the political stuff, and to know what has come before in the previous four movies, like the just absolute separation of genre throughout. I think it's kind of this feels like a whole thought. Like this movie, when we talked about it initially, Case, when I brought up like wanting to do this one, the reason for it was compared to all but the original. I think this is the tightest like summation of all the ideas that had zeitgeisted into Planet of the Apes at that point. Like this is kind of everything it could be at that time.
Yeah. Well, and it knew it was the last movie.
Yeah.
Like, going into production, they were very explicit. This is going to be our last one, because like first Planet of the Apes did well. They got a sequel together in 2 years, and then they were like, okay, well, the second one did well enough. We're going to get a sequel together. But from that point on, each of them had like kind of an idea for a sequel in it. Like, there's a little bit, like, there's a super strong sequel hook between Escape and Conquest.
Yeah.
And then Conquest, the test audiences hated the original ending where the apes murder everyone, and they force like what is the most awkward like dub, like they don't do reshoots, they just zoom in on Caesar's eyes where he clearly is not saying the words he's saying, and they like introduce this idea of compassion, and
we might
leading
not
into
be
this
human,
movie.
but we can be humane.
Right, an expression that they bring up a lot in this one, especially in the extended cut, but I think that's an interesting idea, and that actually prompts a question I have about this movie, which is that, is this movie breaking the wheel? Like, I think that there's an interpretation of this movie with like the tier of Caesar, like the statue of Caesar at the end, that humanity and ape are going to split apart eventually, and that things will go to the planet of the apes, that we are in a fixed loop of time travel. But again, if you allow for a headcanon where the Andy Serkis movies are setting up the original timeline that creates it, that it's not a fixed loop, like, is this a scenario where Caesar, by way of actually having foreknowledge of the future, has established a society that will break away from that cycle of oppression and slavery and so forth? Like there is the chance at the end, because we see a future, not the far future, but we see a point where humanity is still at peace with ape. And I like where like when you watch this movie, do you feel like we are doomed to get to the point where Charlton Heston as Taylor is going to destroy the world?
I think it's interesting that you saw the tier that way, because I kind of saw it as one tier of joy for like a reality where his dream was partially realized, where people are there, or people in apes are standing there listening to lore. And it's interesting that you went, does this mean it'll all be doomed?
Well, that's actually the thing. I didn't take it that way, but the production staff has said that that's what it was supposed to mean. And I was like, oh, that's not how I read that.
Oh, interesting. See, I read that it does not break the wheel, and I think Virgil's lines about time travel at the beginning, about because he suggests the bootstrap paradox, right, where he's like, if you play something in one city, travel back in time to hear it in another city, which I don't know why they needed to add that part in. I guess it was for the distance of the equation, but like it didn't matter. But yeah, if you hear yourself play it, decide you didn't like it, and then don't play, how did you hear yourself play it in the first place? I think that is a line in the movie to suggest the movie believes that this is not something that can be changed. Like it has to happen that way to allow for Heston to make it around the loop. At this point, because they don't know about the future movies, for Heston to be able to make it around the loop, they're just suggesting that, like, unless the bad shit happens, we don't get to the point where we can loop things back around and try over again. I guess that's my read based, because he's the good character relaying it, and he's never wrong in the movie. So I think the movie is suggesting we have to take it seriously.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I personally agree with that read based on the content of the film, but if the film is insisting that this all will go to shit eventually anyways, then I will just accept that.
Yeah, I feel like although the production team may have felt that, I don't feel that the end that they gave us fully implies that. I don't think that the tier is enough to imply that, and I think that, like all good art, it's really up to your interpretation. So I'm going to choose that it broke the time wheel and that everyone is happy now, at least in that little sliver of time. Because the thing is that even if you change time, it's only true where you changed it. It's still, it's the timelines are not going to be, here we are having a really deep conversation, Planet Apes and timelines. But let's just say it, like the timelines, it's only going to be that way. And maybe the tier, you could interpret the tier then like, it's a tier for the other timelines. It's the tier for unrealized dreams. The tier can symbolize a multitude of things. But yeah, I mean, I kind of like my positive read, and I'm keeping it. It broke the gosh darn wheel.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that we can get to that place here with this movie. Like, I think the assertion that the wheel is fixed fits with like the original novel, like the Pierre Boulez, the Monkey Planet, or how, it's the Planet of the Apes, but wherein it's not Earth necessarily that is all of a sudden ape, or like there's multiple permutations of it. Basically, the assertion is that like all societies eventually will just have apes take over because they're just doing monkey see, monkey do, because humanity is inevitably doomed to destroy itself and be replaced. Like that was sort of the assertion that like, oh, people suck, and like eventually the only thing that's going to live on from us are like things copying us without actually like innovating.
Yeah.
Well, and they're again, like Dune is a very direct sci-fi influence on this stuff, and that is Dune's take as well. Like the self-fulfilling prophecies, like just because you know the future doesn't mean you're able to change anything, and it's about enjoying the journey while you're in it. And I think that's why I have such a hard time accepting that they ended up in a good timeline.
I mean, I think it's just sort of an interesting element of it. And like it's like a tease at the end that's meant to sort of be like, okay, well, maybe things are better, but also maybe things aren't. And it's up to you as the audience to sort of go with it. I think that it works better as like breaking of the wheel, knowing that there are then 3 movies that sort of set up like, here's what the original timeline could have been. And I think that sort of makes it a more interesting, 5-decade-long like epic of a movie series.
Yeah.
I would love to get into the themes of this movie.
Yeah, let's talk about this movie specifically, because like we were talking about the franchise, but there's a lot going on in a very short runtime. I'm a big aspect that I really enjoy is the gift of foreknowledge given to Caesar, like especially his ability to like communicate with his parents kind of has like a old Kryptonian feel to it. Like they're trying to introduce some like really cool sci-fi elements that are meant to be reflections of culture at the time, right? So my take on this movie is that they've kind of classified the ape structure, right, to give us like the intellectual orangutans and your everyman chimpanzees and your blue-collar gorillas, and the movie tries to explore the class politics within, I guess, is kind of what I'm taking that it's running after. And having it come out in 1973, I'm trying to think about the world at that time and like what it is that the movie's trying to say. I feel like it's trying to satirize something. I feel like it wants to satirize something. I think it maybe ends a minute early to land on anything, but I like that it seems to be a reflection of like maybe classism at that time. But I'm curious how it struck you guys. Like what the themes within, like what were you getting out of it?
Yeah, there are a lot of like underlining themes. I mean, there's the theme of equality, not just between classes, but even racism. You know, like you have names. The human that is closest to Caesar, who helps him, whose name is escaping.
McDonald.
Thank you. McDonald is a black man, and this is a black man, and he numerous times says to Caesar, like, we need to be equal. We need not to be slaves. Like, we need not to be your servants. Like,
right.
numerous times. So you have McDonald, kind of always, saying this and kind of introducing this, and I am sure it was not lost to the audience in 1973 that this was a black man on screen saying these words, asking for equality. You've also got a lot of like anti-war sentiment in this film.
Yeah.
If anyone knows what was going on in the 70s, you'll understand how that definitely struck people. The destruction of war, the aftermath of nuclear fallout. You've also got, it was not just like anti-war, but like the idea that you want to destroy the weapons of war so that you can't continue to make the same mistakes is something that struck me really hard. Like, it wasn't just like, okay, we've got everything back and we're going to stockpile it. Like, it's like, no, we're going to destroy this so that we as apes and as human are no longer tempted to continue to make the same mistake.
Right.
Because both of us are capable of making those same mistakes and embracing this violence and this urge for power and being unhumane, right? Not fitting into a more compassionate kind of world. And so you hit all of those points. And even in the underground city with the humans, one of the humans say, well, actually, I think they only used their weapons in defense. Like, I think they probably came in peace. Like, maybe we should talk.
Yeah.
And the leader of the humans, who knew Caesar when he was a little ape. I don't know why I had to say it that way. I'm sorry. But like, he knew him when he was a wee ape. He was just like, he was like, no, he's a monster and he's an animal and he'll always, and so
right.
That prejudice right there. So there's like very strong underlining themes. There's a lot of them in there, but they all fit the time.
And that scene specifically that you're talking about is intercut with Caesar talking to his wife, and she's telling him, I don't know. Maybe they were right to attack you. You were trespassing. Maybe like you're not as innocent as you feel like you are. How do you really know that they're mad mutants?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that you're getting those like side by side to each other, like these secondary people, the people that are supposed to be protected. That's the role that they're both filling, and then their leaders are both in the wrong and not hearing it. And that's a really interesting segment within the film to just like exactly what they're trying to highlight there. It's got almost like a pre-South Park edge to it of like, yeah, okay, but just because you're smart doesn't mean that you're also not fucking up over there, Caesar.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things about this film, and it kind of gets drowned out with some not interesting gunfights and things like that. But they do have a really good, they do have a good way of like everyone in this film. No one is quite innocent in anything they do. Like even Caesar's child, who unfortunately, spoiler alert for something that's super old, dies. He was sneaking around. He wasn't supposed to be out. He was climbing trees. He was spying on people. He was eavesdropping. I mean, did he deserve what he got? No, absolutely not. But no one in this film was actually like all the way innocent.
Right.
Like everyone had like a depth of like little gray areas.
Yeah.
It was really lovely.
Yeah. I mean, especially if like thinking about Culp and his relationship with Caesar, like anyone who saw Caesar on the night of the fires, like any human who saw Caesar on the night of the fires, I should say, is going to be scared of him.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like the end scene of Conquest is a terrifying scene. You know, it may have been defanged a little bit, but it's still a chimpanzee talking about taking over the world from humanity with an entire city on fire behind him. And like that, like Caesar has this hubris at the beginning that Ape cannot be as bad as man. Like I think that's one of the strong themes there, where he just assumes that because he has seen the mistakes of someone before him, that they won't make new mistakes or make the same mistakes. And it becomes very clear that that is not the case once we start dealing with Aldo, and even with the way how Caesar handles the mutants when he's encountering them.
General Aldo. General.
Yes. Sorry, General.
I think that's part of the issue. Maybe if people just called him what he'd like to be called, maybe he would have felt a little more respected.
Did he earn that rank, though? That's really my question.
Well, okay, so like
no, definitely not. I took this as being like any of these like sort. I really. So the hard part about talking about Planet of the Apes movies is that there are real world examples that they're drawing on, but if you say it out loud, it feels a little racist to like make a comparison. It feels like a lot of like post-colonial Africa, a lot of the scramble to like take titles for political reasons, but like I really don't like making a comparison between like a black general and a gorilla.
No,
like that feels really uncomfortable.
So I've had that thought along with this series as well. Whenever I talk about it to people, and the thing that I landed on was these movies existed pre-intersectionality, and I don't think these movies understood that they were touching more than these like topical race class things. They didn't know that they were kind of going a little deeper into intersectionality about how all of this is connected to capitalist warlike systems. It was meant broader, and because we have more context now, it's I think a little harsh to apply our intersectionality to this, because they didn't understand that like kind of webbing of things. So yeah, it just gets really ugly to talk about as you like pull back different layers, as things could be connected and definitely are in like certain circumstances, but like we're dissecting art from the 70s, which we were not adults in, and so like understanding what they were going for. Yeah, it gets ugly to talk about. Yeah, it gets, because like, they hadn't pulled everything apart yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, there was sensitivity to it. You know, like, in the first Planet of the Apes, apparently there was a whole issue where they didn't want to hire any black stuntmen for any of the ape roles because they didn't want to get in trouble on that side of it. So, like, there was sensitivity, and I think that there was thought put into it, but, like, just the language has evolved so much.
Yeah, and the way that we describe things. I think also, I think you're probably right. Like, he probably didn't deserve it, but I think that when I saw it as this, I actually didn't think the teacher was that great of a teacher.
Also
I
true.
felt like he was belittling him a little too much.
Also true.
And like I was just like, bro, like You didn't have to mock him in front of the class. Like, oh, that's a good effort. General, good job. Yeah.
Right.
We need to work on this part of your A, but wow, you're coming a long way. Like a little reassurance. And I get it. It was the 70s, so teachers were more assholes. I asked my mom. She went to the school in the 70s. She'll back me up on that. But Mama Alicia, Mom, call in to the show. So anyway, but I think that at the end of the day, like, you know, he felt like he fought.
Yeah.
He felt like he fought for their freedom, and he felt like he deserved it. And I feel like, did he end up being a traitorous, murderous, ridiculous person who was frustrated with the fact that he wasn't good at reading and writing and all the peace stuff? Yeah. Maybe if the teacher wasn't such a dick, he would have found. For me, okay, this is my problem, guys. I have a learning disability, and I tend to hate teachers that are really mean to students in movies. So this made me actually really like, as someone with dyslexia and a couple other things, it made me kind of see something in General Aldo, which is scary. I know
you
he's
got
a murderer.
endeared to him. No, yeah.
I did,
yeah.
because I was just like, there's no reason to embarrass him. And some people are just not good at certain learning methods. And if you, as the teacher, can only teach one way, maybe that's on you.
Yeah.
Maybe that's on you.
Maybe he didn't get a long enough dose of the virus to, like, you know?
Yeah. That's the other thing.
See, your headcanon's helping out just all along the way here.
Oh yeah, the actual exposure.
Yeah,
for
yeah,
everyone.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, how old is Aldo supposed to be?
Right.
Like this is still only like 15 years after Conquest, and like Aldo appears to be a fully grown adult, but he's also going to class. And I guess everyone is kind of. I guess the question across the board is how old are any of them? Like, how smart are any of them supposed to be? Like, why are they talking about physics but also struggling to read?
Right.
Like that. Yeah, that's sort of the issue of this.
Aldo does seem, General Aldo does seem a little bit older. I'm just going to use his preferred title and name because that's what he's asked for. That's respectful in 2022. True, yes. So General Aldo, he like definitely feels and seems older than a lot of the gorillas.
Yeah.
Like he even feels like a little older than Caesar. So I'm wondering if even age, like if we're going with Case's headcanon, if age has something to do with how that could affect them or develop, you know, into the skills that are needed. You know, he's like, why are we learning to do this? I should be riding horses. And it's like, well, I get it, bro. That sounds like a lot more fun than riding Ape does not kill Ape over and over again.
No, yeah. Like, what if they're the more like established the ape brain was before it got the virus, the more plastic a younger brain would maybe be able to utilize the virus and grow the brain more than like a hard set. Because like a 15-year-old gorilla would be a teenager to us, but you know he'd have a full adult. So then you give him the virus, and it's like, okay, you made him like as smart as a human child, but he still has the mental facilities of an adult at that point. So he's struggling with like adult thoughts and kid processing. And as someone in therapy, I understand that. Am I becoming endeared to General Aldo now?
You're welcome.
I think there's interesting comparisons to make in this movie in a way that like we honestly don't even get enough of in like the Matt Reeves Planet of the Apes movies, where we actually are starting to see the striations of classes based around like sort of gravitating towards types of interest. Like it's represented in the Matt Reeves stuff by like the gorillas are like the guards because they're the biggest ones, but like the idea of all these gorillas enjoying riding horses, and like that's a callback to the original because it's the gorillas rounding up the humans in that first scene, but like it also maps pretty well to like the rise of like a cavalier class or like, you know, like a knightly order kind of thing. It maps really well to like, you know, post-Western Roman Europe with like when we're talking about like the Franks or anything like that, where it's like, oh, we're creating like this, you know, what often is the nobles, which are the horse riders, like the, you know, like I said, the cavalry, like that oftentimes is that specific subset, and because they have like military prominence, like take on, you know, more like a higher role in society, and that's them sort of struggling for that. You know, it's interesting that the character is named, you know, General Aldo. Like Aldo specifically is a name that has already shown up in the Planet of the Apes movies at this point. It's the name that Cornelius, when he says, or when he gives the history of the Planet of the Apes in Escape, where he explains that like, oh, eventually an ape will like led the rebellion and stood up to mankind, and that was Aldo. Like, and I wonder if there is a conversation going on here about like, is this someone who's going to be like a usurper king who then creates the society of violence? And like, is Caesar holding off what was the destined, more draconian kind of ruler by way of existing by virtue of time paradox here?
I think the movie actually supports this, because at some point when he comes down from his little ambush of the humans that did come in to shoot up their village, and he basically like lets everyone know that they're going to round stuff up and they're going to continue to like go on the warpath. He sits down in a chair that's very similar to a throne, and someone goes, "You can't do this. That Caesar won't allow it." And he's like, "Caesar is no longer here," which is great because there's Roman blah, blah, blah. And we all know what happened to Caesar with Brutus and things like that. But it just the way that he did it, the actor was kind of sitting on it like it was a throne. So like there is an imagery of having General Aldo as a usurper king, like in that moment. Yeah. Definitely.
So I think that's really just an interesting element to like this movie has way more interesting ideas than the actual execution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, for every this entire conversation, the budget's the biggest thing that's working against it. Like
God.
they couldn't shoot enough.
Yeah.
And like I know that a lot of filmmakers today forget that it used to like just cost money to run film.
Yeah.
Like you could only shoot so much, and they would measure it in yards or feet. Like there's like the cost of just making a shot is expensive, let alone like you get into everything else. Like there's so many cost cutting efforts throughout this whole thing. And some of them are smart and some of them frustrate me. But like, you know that if this movie had the budget of the original, they could have at least done like a really interesting story, and the fights would have been interesting, and like everything would have been like the sets would have been better. Like,
and the
production
music
values
would have been
hurt.
better.
Yeah, production values hurt this movie more than just about anything else.
Yeah.
The music was so boring. Like, I just remember thinking, like, they need, like, not this... Because it's not that the music was bad, okay? Like, someone did compose it, whatever. But it's clearly, like, recycled. Like, it's clearly, like, patched together. And it's very dry. And that... I forgot... You know, I did forget that they used to put credits at the beginning of movies, like over like stuff, like while I was watching it. And for like half a second, I was like, "Wait, did I accidentally go to the end?" I was like, "No, right? It's the 70s. Never mind."
It's an old movie.
Sam, you brought up the character of McDonald, and I wanted to talk about that character because I think that we lost out a lot by virtue of a recast from Conquest to Battle. It was supposed to be the same McDonald character from that one, which was also a black man who had issues with like the whole like, "Oh, we're living in a slave society right now. I feel really weird about this because I'm a black man." Like,
right.
And at various points says like, "I am the descendant of slaves."
Yeah.
Like they're very explicitly talking about like how like no, some people are very acutely aware that this is like a bad thing that humanity like fell into, and that we're better. I mean, I don't know if better off being destroyed, but like. Wants to see the world like move away from those kind of patterns.
I mean,
I
think the movie series does believe that we're all better off being destroyed. But go on.
Sure, but the thing is, so because they couldn't get the original actor Harry Rhodes back, they rewrote the part as being his younger brother, which is why there's like these very awkward exposition bits where it's like, "Well, when my brother was doing this thing, he told me about all these things." Or when Culp is like, "That's the younger brother of the man who was the assistant of my friend." I'm like, wow, you know a shitload about like family members for people who were like your coworkers.
My brother was telling me about this video of future apes at his job. Right. Okay, yeah, sure.
I once went to their family home barbecue. That's actually probably the only explanation.
Right.
I mean, not that, like, I think he does a really good job.
Oh, yeah, from Assault on Precinct. Austin Stoker.
Yeah, I think that Austin Stoker does a really good job with the part.
I do,
and
too.
I think he would have also had been great if he had been the original cast, but it is an awkward recast point right here that I feel like they didn't do, like... Him just being the fucking brother feels like so much more awkward than just like it's a different person. like there's a little bit of exposition, but you could just say, "I used to be the archivist. Like you just didn't see me before because it's a different thing." And like the relevant information he could just have because he worked there, but he just wasn't one of the main characters. Right. Like but we miss out on this like through line of a character who actually was by virtue of being like just caught up in the inertia of the direction of society, got stuck in a situation where he realized all of a sudden, like, holy shit, I am overseeing a slave society. And like I very much do not agree with this whole thing. And that's why he sides with Caesar at the end of Conquest. And then he, was supposed to be the right-hand man, or like at least the representative of humanity in this movie. And like, so we lose that element, and that's sucks.
Yeah.
Like that, like that just sucks. Like, it would have been nice if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, you lose a little bit of that. Plus, what could have happened when they were at the factory and they come to face with what would have been his coworker?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because that whole bit where it's just like he's on the security being like, that's Caesar. I'm like, how do you recognize a chimpanzee 15 years later?
Yeah.
And I get it. It's the chimpanzee from the Night of the Fires. Like, I understand that, like, he's going to be fairly infamous. But then it's like, that's the younger brother of this whole thing. I'm like, I don't recognize the orangutan. I'm like, I didn't think you would.
If it isn't McDonald Jr.
Right.
It's such an easy workaround too, because you could have added to his character. Let's say we go with your pitch there that like he's just an archivist that knew that the tapes were there. What if he knew that there was shit on those tapes he didn't want Caesar to see, and so telling him about the tapes is like a step in his character development, as well as delivering new information without it being an awkward, and my brother told me about these tapes at work one time when we were discussing it over tea.
I mean, and you can also have him be friends with the character from the past. Like, maybe that's partially why he's there, right? Like, it's like, well, I'm here because I followed my friend because my friend believed that you were right, and we both saw the ways, and you've got to know this information because I was there all the time. I was recording your parents. I saw what they were talking about, but you should see it yourself, kind of thing. Like, it also creates like a stronger like reason for him to want to go back to the archives, show him, because this is like his life's work, right? You know, like, oh, no, you have to see my life's work. Yes. You know, it would have been way more interesting.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that sets up like the central conflict that arguably the movie is about, the titular battle part, although you could also say that the battle is the battle for the soul between Aldo and Caesar. But you know, we get to go to this like bombed out city, and like the production values are pretty good. I'm assuming that those are sets from the Omega Man.
Yeah.
Because the screenwriters came right off of doing that. But like, I mean, they actually look really good. Like when you arrived at this bombed out city, like, oh, okay, definitely a reuse, but like a good reuse. Very, very proud of those choices there. And then we get in there, and it's like the mutant city, and we deal with these individuals, and it's just like, oh, as with everything, it's just moving along a little too fast. Like they're fully on like a couple generations ahead of the mutants from beneath at this point. Like they're wearing weird caps, they've got like weird marks all over their body, and they're starting to worship a bomb.
Yeah.
I mean, as one does.
And we get the scene with Caesar actually seeing the clips of his parents. And I find that scene really interesting because why the fuck did they have stills for them for all those spots? Which, like, I was like, it must be for rights. But the first part of the movie is like 5 minutes of recycled footage from the previous two movies.
It's one of the first times in a long time I've watched a movie that had a previously on section to set it up.
Yeah.
2 movies worth, too.
Yeah. Like, a lot of footage.
We're going to catch you up. Okay, kiddos.
So, these time-traveling apes, I was like, what? That's right. That just starts off like that, buddy.
I mean, it's worthwhile, but like I kept on checking, being like, okay, how long? Oh my god! And it is a full 5 minutes of footage.
Yeah. It's a whole montage.
Like yeah, it is quite a bit. And then here we don't. They just have stills, and then they don't actually show like the apes talking. I guess part of that might be it to show off, you know, when the movies had a better budget, like what the makeup looks like versus now.
Yeah.
Maybe
might be there, and it might be some, you know, like licensing dealies, but like again, that doesn't make sense because they had so much footage from before.
But I'm still guessing that maybe it is because they like wasted whatever they had on their budget on that 5 minutes. If they had just cut out a minute, maybe we would have gotten a couple of motions.
But I think what that scene does set up really well, though, is then this additional element looking at Caesar. And looking at him being given foreknowledge. This is the spot where it becomes Dune. Because prior to this point, he was a revolutionary. He actually, you know, he's this wonderful figure, but he doesn't really know that much. Ricardo Montalban told him a bunch of stuff, but he didn't know that much about the ape future stuff. You know, it's like, oh, well, eventually an ape society will, you know, be dominant. But he didn't know that the world ended.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't know all those things. So he might honestly think that he is building towards a utopia just based on the stories he's been told, third hand by way of his circus trainer, like, adoptive father, who was quickly told the stories by his actual parents. Like, who also were just piecing everything together last minute. Because, like, if we go off the Planet of the Apes movies, at the end of the first one, they're like, oh, fuck, our ideas that maybe we were, like, previously the pets of humans, those might be right. And Cornelius puts a lot of shit together between the end of the first movie and traveling back in time and being like, okay, I've pieced it together. Like, 300 years from now, you guys are going to, like, have a slave society of apes, and Aldo's going to rise up. That story comes together really quickly.
Yeah.
And so it's probably full of holes and, like, all kinds of wrong. And then,
but if it's one of those self-fulfilling prophecy things, the fact that he goes back to stop it is the thing that launches into the story. It might be one of those situations that not Lawgiver. This is the one that looks like Lawgiver. Virgil, thank you. Virgil's theory at the beginning, just like the fact that he went back to started it. Like, if he didn't do that at all, it may not have launched into it at all.
Also a thing there. And I think that's where it's cool.
Yeah.
Where, like, this element of there is foreknowledge of the future sitting somewhere in the world, and whoever taps into it sort of, like, sets the world into that, like, cycle of destruction of, like, literal destruction, the planet getting destroyed. Like,
right.
And I think that's a cool element there, like the challenge of foreknowledge, because that then does weigh on Caesar at every point from that, like, for the remainder of the movie.
Yeah.
In some way, at least.
He's such an interesting character to me. Like, just the weight of what he's going through and the ways that they try to humanize him in like how he interacts with people, and like he's often wrong. He's not like he's not a perfect protagonist, and that, I find that really, really engaging, and that's something that's carried through the series as well. That, like, I think Matt Reeves really goes in heavy on that in the later films of, like, how heavy is the crown that sits on this king. But I like him specifically in this movie for it. He philosopher main characters is a weird main character, like characters that are actively fighting mental battles more than they're fighting physical battles. I think is really, again, it's more Dune shit. It's just Paul Atreides. That's all we're doing here. But in an Earth setting, in a smaller environment, something that's a little more digestible than the Dune saga, it still functions really, really well. And I really enjoy Caesar within this for that reason, that he's kind of struggling with epic, giant questions, really. Like, this is heavy shit for one guy to go through. Yeah,
I do have a note, which is just like, I adore Caesar as a protagonist. Like, as this epic figure who doesn't appear in the first two Planet of the Apes movies, but is, like, ultimately the protagonist of the whole franchise.
Protagonist de facto, yeah.
Yeah, like, he's such an epic, kingly figure. Like, there's like shades of Gilgamesh, shades of Moses, especially, like, with war.
Yeah.
This idea of this person who shaped the foundation of the society and tried so damn hard to make it all work, and knows that it's not gonna be a perfect thing. Especially this version of Caesar.
Yeah, he's working really hard to uphold ideals and without knowing how exactly to enforce those ideals. And it makes it very interesting because there's always this inner struggle.
I really love his setup with Mandemus, just like, and Mandemus voicing at least twice that I can remember, I am the conscience of Caesar. Like, that's for a heavy character like Caesar to instate that role onto someone, that's a heavy role to instate, and he takes it so fucking seriously. I'm sorry, I have been cussing a lot. Am I allowed to cuss?
We curse all the time. This is fine.
I got scared for a second there. I was like, I think I said shit like 8 times.
I'm pretty sure
at
I've
the
said
beginning.
fucking cool and fucking weird a few times on this.
I love Mandemus for that, and that decision exists off screen. Like, we don't see that get instated. We just watch this process happen, and we kind of learn about it while we watch it. The fact that it exists says a lot about Caesar himself. that like this is something that he takes so seriously that he would make it next to impossible for the wrong person to get their hands on weapons in his future, and it shows you how where his mind is benevolently. I really like that. Like, just off screen, this man has been doing hard work, making really tough choices to make this work, and I really appreciate that. And then we get to see his thinking process and how he weighs morality. And oh man, a moral hero.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah,
and putting into place protections to make sure that he himself doesn't become fully corrupted, because there are people within his society, or apes within his society, that would follow him blindly.
Right.
I mean, not General Aldo's men, but certainly there are the people, because even when he decides to, spoiler alert for people who haven't seen it, I don't know why you're listening to this yet, they when he eventually takes General Aldo's life, basically as retribution, justice, I don't know. He wonders if it actually is justice to have taken that life. And so, but like Virgil kind of just like, for you, it's okay. And the fact that, and that's the reason why Virgil's not guarding the weapon and the Demas is. So it also speaks to the fact that Caesar's very good at knowing who's in his team, right? To safeguard and make sure that he doesn't end up the corrupted leader. So it says monumental things about his leaderships, I think.
Okay, so you just brought up a thing I wanted to talk about, which is Virgil being the student of Mandemus. I thought was really interesting as an element. I think the timeline does not work, but like, he's like, oh, in my youth, back when we were all living in Century City, he was my teacher. Like that element, I don't think works really well there. But I do like the idea of this continuity of orangutan viziers that sort of like has taken up by the time we get to Dr. Zaius in the future. I like the idea of the orangutan starting off as these like vizier types who become the viceroy, who have effectively usurped like the control of the community of apes by the time we get to Dr. Zaius. Like, that they are not the military leaders, they're not the scientific leaders, they are the religious and philosophical leaders that have become so powerful by way of knowing how to manipulate the other groups against each other. That I think it's really interesting that we see the foundation here, that we see the only ones we see in this movie are all like presented as good in different ways. Like Virgil like is much more okay with like breaking the rules. And this is a spoiler for my pitch, which is that like I feel like we're missing out on like a little bit of a sinister narrative with the orangutans, like considering that they typically are the actual bad guys in the series, and that the warlike gorillas are usually more just like the manipulation of like baser instincts, like the fact that they don't want to like learn reading and writing, they want to learn how to ride and shoot guns and so forth, because that's just exciting and cool. And like the idea is like it's appealing to like sort of like the base like novelty, which maps pretty well again to like post-Roman Europe. Like a lot of people who were like nobles and whatnot didn't care to learn, and it gave an opportunity for the church to seize power. Like I think that's sort of a missing element there. And Mandemus is a really cool take on it. Like, I love his personality. He's such an like, it doesn't make sense that he would be so articulate and so smart and so everything about it at this point in the timeline, but it's still cool. And like, and that idea that like, okay, we've got that, and you can see that he's the teacher for like Virgil says he's his teacher, and we get the vibe that like lawgiver is like the next in that line, like, a couple centuries later. But like, I think that part's cool.
Yeah. Totally.
It's a great. I landed on the same thing when I was thinking for my pitch of like, these guys are being underutilized. If we're doing a classism metaphor, I think it might be important to highlight that a little bit more within this. I really like honestly, that's why I like Tim Burton's version so much for his portrayal of the like orangutan class, with Paul Giamatti just being like the noble sons, you know what I mean? Like those 1600s aristocrat types. Like, I don't know how to do anything. Like, he's so useless.
It feels like a Merovingian king.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my. Yeah. And knowing that it stems from this like really benevolent, helpful, useful, like early Socrates era kind of stuff. Like they're really trying to reflect real world politics and how they evolved across the monkey time or the ape timeline, and to show, I think it's on purpose to show that even if the humans weren't here, the apes would have landed over here anyways. Like, they would have landed on this shit on their own.
Yeah. One thing that I was surprised that they landed on their own so fast was that they all revert to the outfits of the future timeline in this movie.
Yeah.
And I know that this is a cost-cutting measure. Like, I mean, I know there's a few things going on. Like, for one, like, just they're saving money by being like, okay, we've got these ape costumes. They're color-coded already. Let's roll with that. And also, you can tell that they're shooting and it's fucking cold out because everyone is wearing turtlenecks. Like, every human, when you look at them, has, like, a long-sleeve shirt on and a turtleneck underneath, including, like, non-mutated, just regular people.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, oh yeah, it's definitely fucking cold when they're filming. And that's probably good because I know, and we'll talk about this when we talk about Planet of the Apes 1, that one was shot during the summertime, and a lot of people almost died because they were shooting in like full ape outfits in the middle of summer in California.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get like that these costumes are nice and insulated and they cover up enough of their body so that you only need to do like the hands and the faces for the actual like ape effects and so forth. But it is crazy that they're all wearing exactly the same clothes that they would be 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, maybe they're just the kind of creatures that really enjoy what they like. You know, they're like, yeah, this is our style. They're very comfortable with it. Case. No evolution needed. We've evolved enough in our minds.
Yeah, they come on one fashion and then they just keep on doing it for forever.
Well, I mean, it's a good fashion, so why not? It's breathable. It moves. You can attack people from trees. You know, like, it's fine. You look dignified if you're going to a meeting. I mean, it's really the catch-all outfit.
Yeah. I wonder if they would devalue fashion, them all being like furry and covered in fur. Like they would just have differences in color. With their fur. I wonder, like, if you were really going to dive into, like, you know, how these kinds of things evolve, if that's something that they would even, if maybe clothes would be less likely and they would like style and color their fur in different ways to stand out for fashion's sake, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think if they're actually like located in colder environments, like apes would need some kind of insulation. Like, their bodies are not built for that, even if they do have like thick fur. And like, reminder, chimpanzees actually have less hair follicles than humans do. Mm-hmm. We just have very, very thin hair on our bodies. A chimpanzee couldn't just like walk around in like San Francisco without any kind of protection in the middle of winter. Like that's going to be an issue. So like they would have to like gravitate towards some kind of clothing. It's just weird that it's the same clothing that they'll like settle on and just like 100%. Never change.
I mean,
and I kind of would be cool with it if they were like starting to learn how to make clothes, because like the society of like the Planet of the Apes is not like, while they can make guns and so forth, it's not industrial. Like, they don't have like factories that they're building everything. Everything's like handcrafted. It'd be interesting if they were like learning to hand stitch clothes and they only had like a few things to kind of go off of or something like that. You know, like just as a foundation for eventually the fashions of the future. And again, I get it. It's totally budget. It's a budget thing.
Absolutely.
I just kept thinking, like, man, like they all had like jumpsuits in the previous movie that would have at least been like
an excusable for the story
carried over. You know, you could. Yeah, it would make sense. Like, okay, we had a nuclear war. We can't make a lot of new clothes, so like we've got like dirty versions of the like bright red and green jumpsuits from the previous movie,
or those had been stripped down and used for, you know, their pants. Like, I'm thinking back to the original movies and the kinds of clothes the humans wore. The human slaves wore in the original film. I'm like, I feel like that is what early ape society would look like until they advanced to that future clothing line. But then I guess you have to show like furry body, like fully furry bodies, and that's even more expensive. And
like they definitely needed full coverings. But like I don't know. I feel like they could have made a case for just like, oh yeah, we scrounged clothes from like the local Sears.
True.
You know, like when the nuclear bombs went off.
Well, I would have liked to see like apes in jeans. Apes in leather.
That would have been amazing. Again, budget.
True.
Well, but you probably would have all those clothes in the wardrobe, and then you could have General Aldo ride up in like a leather jacket, looking all James Dean like.
Yeah, but you would also have to like support that by like at least having an alcove of a partially destroyed department store or something, and that would cost money.
True.
Yeah. Or like, oh, you could do military fatigues for the gorillas.
Oh yeah.
Like they like raided an army surplus or something, and then that's like because they're all obsessed with that kind of shit. And then you could kind of like differentiate them in the proto culture based on like what they're imitating from our modern culture that they are then taking and using and like transforming into the future stuff. Like that would be cool. Like like the General Aldo, he's got this like necklace thing, like it covers like the top part of his chest. It's the same piece that was on General Ursus in Beneath. And that was used to sort of like set up like, oh, this is like a proto version of the armor that Ursus would wear. Like if they like take that part and have with like modern military stuff and like look like it's like, okay, this part we handmade, this is ape, what ape looks like, and this is what human looks like, and this is what we're taking the human stuff, and it's a stage between like the human clothing and then like what ultimately apes will settle on once they have like a fully established society. But this is like early in that phase. Would have been kind of cool.
Right.
That's another question the movie kind of left me with, to move into maybe some of my negatives. It's not really established is like this ape society like a tiny little pocket and the rest of the world is either irradiated from bombs, or I guess not every city in the world could have got functionally destroyed. Are there pockets of humanity out there? Like this feels kind of like they exist on an island with them on one end and then like the irradiated city on the other, and I'm not sure what all else is out there. And I'm not sure how interested the movie was in telling us that either.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I felt like I asked myself more than once, like, why. Again, humans are weird. So I do think that there's probably something in there to why these people would stay down there, including vanity. But like, I was just like, bro, like they felt secure enough to chase the apes or the intruders out of the cave. And to leave the cave to like wage war. And I was just like, so why are you still living there in the radiation? Like, is this like, and I understand like there's like small things in the text of like, oh, they're down there and they're protecting this area. But like, there's clearly space. You could have left. Like, you didn't have to stay in that radiation. And I don't think that the film ever really gives us a real enough reason, other than maybe some like, kind of a couple lines where they just seem very passionate about protecting this space, to really say that I would risk my skin peeling off my face for this. Like why would I devote my time to being here when there's clearly an outside world and you're okay leaving it? Like you left it.
See, this is another circumstance where I really see opportunity for like less and than storytelling. That the biggest issue with this movie is there's lots of and than storytelling, and that could have been turned into like, it could have been that those people were trapped underground and they had to find a way in, and them getting in allowed the people out. In the first, you know what I mean? Like him needing to know the future is the thing that unleashes the group on them, that leads to the gorillas breaking out. Like, his choices are all kind of predetermined in front of him. You could have introduced that in like right there, just exactly right there. Oh yeah, that we've been trapped in here, and now we see this escape where these guys busted in with their superior intellect that they were able to gather because they've lived in this more utopic, peaceful society. And it's all character development, baby.
Yeah.
I mean, like on some level, I also, after living through quarantine, know that humans would not have been so happy to just stay underground like that unless they believed there was a true and real threat above ground that they couldn't exit. Right? Like there needs to be a reason why, whether it's being trapped or literally feeling like the earth is not a place that's safe for them. So
maybe there was a virus.
If there was a virus, or let's say General Aldo behind Caesar's back was going around and kind of picking humans off that came out, secretly, that kind of thing. And that just spoiled my part of my pitch. Damn it, Sam, we are not past the commercial break. But like, if that was, if that was the thing, then you understand, like you get more for why they're afraid to have Caesar come in, and also why they won't fucking leave.
Right.
Like, I did have a huge problem with that. Like, I was just like, okay, well, yeah, I guess. Like, I'm very devoted to this place I once worked. I got news for you guys. Nobody likes work. No one's sticking around that long. Also, if you're that kind of person, your job doesn't love you enough. Please go home. Please clock out.
They would replace you the next day, I promise.
Yeah. Once all of your skin fell off and the cancer set in, they'd be like, well, I'm so sorry. You have to leave. We've got this other guy who's willing to watch this.
And it's funny because, like, I don't want to knock it for adding that. Like, I love that this is a precursor to the reveal of their skin faces in the previous movies. Like, this movie loves the series. This movie specifically loves this series and feels like it's just really trying to, like, try everything that has been tried along this and wrap it together into, you know, a finale for everyone. If you liked this little element in one of the previous movies, we remembered that. Like, we're showing you what that looks like. I feel like we kind of got worse at prequels since here. Like, this kind of prequel, like functional prequel, I really don't think we're this good at anymore, as far as you trying to set this stuff up in a useful way, in a way that's not like an obvious, like, on the nose setup of like, oh yeah, do you remember this thing? We're doing that thing. This movie's like, no, we thought of that when we wrote the script, and we thought of that when we built the sets, and we thought of that with the characters. So you get to discover all of this stuff that is prequel-y. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this movie loves the previous ones way more than I even realized when I had seen it before. Because, like, looking into it, it's like, oh, the pacifist guy Mendez is like, that name's all over the stuff in Beneath, and it's like, oh, they're really setting all that up. It does make me ask, where is this movie supposed to take place?
Yeah.
Because the first two movies are definitely New York. Like, that's the point. And then the third one is definitely LA. So where, you know, I guess like Caesar was with a traveling circus, so they could have gone anywhere, but like it's being shot in LA because it's at Century City. So it's like, it feels like it's still LA, and this feels like it's like just in, you know, somewhere in California.
And this movie had no interest in answering that question because they
none whatsoever.
They even have the mutants say at some point that place we came from. It's like, oh wow, thanks guys, really specific. I was hoping for a little more information there.
And I get it, like, okay, on a certain level, it doesn't matter.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's really funny because also because I was trying to get a sense of it too. When McDonald was like talking about street names, he kind of mentioned like two streets that could be in New York City, but then he mentioned like two streets that definitely were not in New York City, and I was like, where are you? Where are you?
It's just the nebulous city, you know, it's the one city humanity came from.
Yeah.
And we all destroyed
it kind of
ourselves.
feels like very Simpsons to me, like Springfield, but you don't know which Springfield in America kind of thing.
But it's just so funny because like the first movie is like so fixed on like where it is.
Yeah.
And like that's, you know, kind of the point. I mean, I think that just generally this movie, like looking at the mutant stuff, looking at everything, it's weird that Earth is so cool or like not like cool in the
it's cool. You
global
cool
warming
Earth.
sense, but like actually
awesome.
just nice. Like I actually do mean like in the like it's a cool place to live, guys.
Yeah, it
like,
is. It's where I keep all my stuff.
They've got an awesome like tree village with like farm fields and everything, and looks great. And like it's just like just a little bit away from like effectively Hiroshima. Like, you know, it's weird that the world of the apes, and this is what we're saying with the mutants, like why didn't they come out? Because it appears to be very nice the second you leave like the cities themselves, and we know that that's not really how nuclear war would go.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It is weird that this is not just like this tiny little scrap of population that survived. Like it, you know, that we very well could imagine a shitload of people all over the world still just fine, and this just happens to be like a group of apes that got out, and like where is this all going to go? How is this going to become the status quo? I don't know. I feel like they could have sold us on it being like, oh no, like really, like we're almost at like full extinction level.
Yeah.
It's just like a weird element there. But I like that they're dealing with the mutants. I do find it weird that they're already wearing caps, that they're already like in this like phase where it's like already cult level. And it's like one of those spots where like rewatching it now, I'm like, man, war does this exact thing so much better.
Right.
Like like Woody Harrelson's character in War is just such a better version of the same like cult leader type thing, the same sort of setups that they're doing, and it feels like a much more apocalyptic world that they're in. Even though it's actually not a nuclear exchange in that, where like, but it's still like cold and desolate and shitty, and like humanity is at war with itself in that all.
I think that they just didn't fully commit to that part. There's so many themes here, like in this movie, not War. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to.
Well, I don't know if they could. Again, this movie had it had a $1.7 million budget.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine the amount of like volunteered time just from fans of the series to make something like this happen back then. Like this for 1.7, like I it feels like a John Carpenter movie for a lot of reasons, and many of them are like how they solved these budget problems. And there's something really endearing to me about watching an underdog film like this reach as far as it's reaching, to be like, I have something to say about society and not a lot of money to do it. And also, this is a sci-fi series about time traveling apes. So let's see where we end up. Like it's so experimental. It's so punk rock. I really dig it for that. But it leads to all of these like immersion breaking things across the movie,
and just moments where it's like, oh, it's a bummer that we don't have the money. Like, the last fight between Caesar and Aldo, I like, my notes are like, God, can you imagine if that fight was happening with the modern like Andy Serkis style stuff? Like, I can't think of a proper like gorilla chimpanzee fight that we've seen in the Planet of the Apes movies, because like, generally speaking, either it's two humans and actors and it doesn't fucking feel like anything because it's just two humans, or two humans in like makeup, and like it's like, okay, yeah, that's fine, but like it's just two guys just like struggling not to fall off a tree. Or we've had like, generally everyone been like, no, the gorillas are real fucking big, we're not gonna do that, we'll have gorilla on gorilla fights. But like a tree fight of a chimpanzee swinging around against a gorilla who just can't, like, has too much weight to step on most of the branches would have been really cool.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's a bummer. And like the fights, like the actual like siege of like the mutants on the Ape City, it doesn't look that impressive, but it's because they don't have that much money. Like
you can see a lot of like Mad Max in that too. They were like, well, if we get a bunch of vehicles in a field, it'll look like a battle, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like, exactly. Mad Max kind of stuff is going on a lot there, and it's but it's not quite a Mad Max. It's not quite as good as a Mad Max movie in terms of handling that use of it. Also, it's just like, ooh, not quite there. Yeah, I mean, they make excellent work of it. Like they like when they would blow up like some of the tree houses, they shot it from like 4 different angles so that they can insert the shots from different angles at different points, where it's like, oh, that's one tree house blowing up, that's a different tree house blowing up. It's all the same tree house. They just like had a bunch of cameras. Like they're doing their best, but they're just like, they just don't have much to work with. Like they've got a lot of good themes going on. They've got a fairly coherent voice, at least by way of Paul Dean, who had written the previous 2 movies, came back and did a rewrite on this one, so that it like, I think that's where we get a lot of the references that are going to be a little bit more tightly like worked in there. And then we've got actually some really good actors. Like Roddy McDowall is great. Like he's such a strength of the series, and does such a great job in selling this character. You know, like we said, as this like heavy as the head that wears the crown type leader. Like I said, Austin Stoker as McDonald. Like, I wish that it wasn't a recast, because it would have been nice to have that continuity. But I still think he does a great job. I think he really sells it on the, like, we're not your equals. Like, you want us to be here and not be violent with us, but you're not our equals. Paul Williams, I think, is good as Virgil, but there's like a little bit of like a weirdness to the character, and it's mostly because I want him to be a bad guy. Yeah,
I know exactly. He's supposed to, like, I feel like that's the prototype goo to like the orangutans we get later on.
Right, but then like we said Lou Ayres as Mandemus. Like, I think he does it. Like, he has a really interesting performance that I think is really, really compelling. And Claude Akins as General Aldo. Actually, like, his speeches are really good. And there are some moments there where you're like, oh, I see this brutal intellect there, like this like half-formed brain that just wants violence because all it knows is violence. I like those things that are going on there. I don't really love Stephen Darden as Culp. Like, I think that he worked better as this like CIA type guy in the previous movie. In this one, as like the cult leader, I don't think it has quite the right vibe.
It kind of reminded me of Dennis Hopper in Waterworld a little bit. That just kind of like that was a really over the top decision for what is otherwise a pretty grounded movie. Okay,
And I would say even more so.
oh yeah, absolutely, is even more over the top. Yeah, he feels like he's in a Mad Max movie. Like he saw this as a Mad Max movie and went that way with his character, and then everyone else was like, this is like a political-esque action futurism. Like they kind of left it vague, and they all just went for acting chops, and I feel like Severin really went hard into like Mad Max camp for his character.
There's two things left that I really want to talk about before we take our break. The first is John Huston as the lawgiver. So we finally actually get to see lawgiver in this movie after it being referenced multiple times previously, and especially with like the statues in the previous movies. Like, what do you guys think about that as like the bookmark or the bookends for this all? Like the superstructure that tells the story.
Is it weird that it feels a little Star Trek to me somehow? Like it almost feels that. The addition of it feels made for TV to me.
I think that makes sense.
That's kind of how it struck me.
Well, I can see that. Because it's a gather around, children. Let me tell you a tale of great Caesar, and yeah, it's kind of like I thought it was fine. I thought it was nice to tie it in. So I think limited budget. Plus, this is definitely the last movie, and they know it's going to be the last movie. And I think it leaves the door open for you imagining the world the way you want it to imagine, no matter what the artist said about that here. Because you can think like, oh, like this is like he's there, he's reminding people of like this moment where Caesar remembered, or not remembered, but kind of realized, that was the word I was looking for, realized that everyone, apes and humans, are susceptible to those flaws, and that in order to have a truly peaceful society, we have to continue to remove the things that really entice us to destruction, to self-destruction. And so like in that way, it's kind of nice because you tie in basically what is the thesis of the entire series, which is that there is self-destruction within society, within humanity. And that is mirrored in the apes at times. That is only us at times. That is how we treat the apes. That is how they eventually treat us. So that the destruction of others and the destruction of humanity, right, that is all part of self-destruction. And so having this character that we've seen before kind of tell this story as if it's a parable, because it's the moment where like it's the we'll just take away this temptation, for self-destruction, and kind of try to teach that to each new generation as they are living together in harmony. It kind of ties the series together, and it can leave you hopeful or it can leave you sad because you know who this character and how they play out later. And, and so it's kind of like, will these words actually mean anything as we're telling this parable, right? Because this story, like the story that we're watching, is kind of like a parable now, right? It's kind of like this thing to teach generations. It's orally being taught, like this is what happened. And this is what, it was almost an insurrection, and Caesar was almost overthrown, and he almost became exactly what he didn't think he was going to become. And then he had the foresight to pull back and realize that like we needed to leave equally. And that's why we're all here together now. So hear this story and try to keep this up. Okay. So I think that you could, it's fine. It does have a made for TV element. I agree with that. But I do think that it is a nice way of kind of paying homage again to the previous movies and tying up the story as the last movie.
I like that. I like functionally it almost like if I take all of that and run with Case's headcanon, Lawgiver is like functionally outside the multiverse. He's like the Watcher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, and now you've seen the good timeline, and next we can look at, he kind of exists outside. And then we can look at the Tim Burton timeline. I can see that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the lawgiver like supports the thesis that this is breaking of the timeline, just because he's talking about Caesar, because he, as opposed to Aldo, as opposed to anything else. Like, I think there's that element there. But obviously, like, it's just like nice to be like, oh, here's a character we have alluded to for 4 movies, and we are fine, or at least 3, because I don't think he's ever referenced in Conquest, but. Like it's a thing that we definitely had strong allusions to in the first 2. Like, there's all those statues of lawgiver, in those where like, all right, we'll seal this part up here. We open the movie and we don't see who he's talking to. So we allow for a scenario where, this is just him telling the story about the final fall of humanity kind of thing. And then like hit the reveal at the end that, we've got this sort of mixed group, I think is at least an interesting element of like, if this is the end point from an 8 movie arc, if you're looking at it from that way, of that weird anti-machete order, I guess you would describe it as.
Sure.
Like, watch it. I guess you watch Rise, then the original Planet of the Apes, and then Dawn, and then War, and then Beneath, I guess. Like, whatever kind of order you're going to do for this. This works as like we have now seen all these struggles, all this stuff, like every almost slipping back into kind, and we finally emerged from it. Like, we've become, an actual society of harmony. I think that part's cool, but again, I think it's like it was originally not meant to be quite so much of like we're definitively saying that like we're outside of that timeline. I think it was intended to be like, oh well, we might have come through, but we actually might not, because humanity still has the same tendencies towards violence, and apes are just the same as humans now. Like, it's it's a little bit of Animal Farm at the end where you can't tell if it's the pigs or the humans when they're arguing with each other. Like the it's 2 kids, and it's just like, oh, it's kind of cute, but like that violence is sort of being represented as being endemic to the state of this like higher level of intellect, that we can't break away from that cycle.
Well, and it's really hard to be a social commentary and land on where you think things are going to head. You know what I mean? Like, because it is kind of the safe bet to say that history will repeat itself. History has continually repeated itself. So like that makes sense to me. But if you want to do this breakaway timeline, I like the idea that it is possible to be broken.
Yeah. I don't need this movie to have an answer. And like I said, I think that it's one that is more interesting by way of additional sequels, sort of like building out the franchise. As a finale, it works fine to be like ambiguous, like either we're heading back towards that point or not. I do wish that the lawgiver was more firmly established in that lineage that we were talking about with like Virgil and with Mandemus. Like, I almost like the idea of lawgiver being a title that had been passed on from one to the next or something to that effect. But I know that that's not really how they sort of saw it. They saw lawgiver as being like very specifically their Moses type figure. What with the slates and everything, like the scrolls. Yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, I think it like you were kind of stuck in a spot of like, how do you like definitively say this is the last movie? And what's better than having like this like messianic figure standing there like being like, and that's how we round up the story, guys.
Right. Yeah.
like it's done. We're finished. It's been 5 movies. Right. We're all tired.
And the end.
Yes.
And you're welcome. Everyone go the heck home.
What happens next is up to you.
Exactly.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I'm done reading.
Right.
So the one other thing I want to talk about before we go to break, and I know this is running long. No. The fact that that's like a big like talking point in this movie, where when the teacher Abe says no to the gorilla, that's like all of a sudden a huge fight.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like when people tell me no. I respect it, but
so their logic for it was stemmed off of previous movies. So that's like previous movie continuity.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things going on. There's the whole like the first word that someone said, or like that an ape said back, is the one that they'd heard a million times. That whole like he said no, and that becomes the thing for Caesar in the later movies, but was like an Aldo thing there. Like there's that. I just don't understand like how you could have it be like there's a rule: humans can't say no to an ape anymore in this society. And because I know what they're trying to do here. They have this like paternalistic ape society holding on to people as second-class citizens, like, and that's what they're going for. I don't understand how the language works if that's the case. Like, I think
you would have to use complete sentences and not use the word no.
Yeah. Like I would prefer not to. Would not be a just singular no.
Yeah. Like I think instead of saying no, you can't have a cookie. You would have to say something like, I'm saving that for someone else. Like you would have to say no, but in positive ways. I think anyone who's done gentle parenting, which by the way, I'm not a parent, but I have TikTok. Gentle parenting would tell you that there are ways to say no without saying no. And so, like, I think that they would just have to use phrases that basically mean no, but not say no because no is triggering, because no was the word that helped limit them. That's what I that I got. That it was the word that basically kept them as ape slaves.
Well,
you know,
and if you take it like on a realistic, like real world basis, if you had a group of sentient beings that were 10 times stronger than you, that had just been through a terrible ordeal, and their trigger word was a simple no, and that might unleash, you know, like mental health fury upon you, it might be in your best interest in that society to find ways to not just say no. You know, like it just kind of makes sense that it might be like so we got to figure out a way to work around and around each other. And if not saying no is the only rule to like help this other, you know, group cope and not get constantly PTSD triggered, it kind of makes sense. Yeah, I would try to find a way to function in that society.
Yeah,
I just feel like that needed to be better
100%. Yeah,
like the thing is, there's no real set up for it in the previous movie that no by itself is this like traumatic word for them. It's a word that they hear a ton because it's a negative and they're getting commanded a lot, but like it doesn't feel like that it should just be like, oh well, you said the word and now we're gonna have a riot. Like seems like a bit of a stretch. And I don't mind the idea if it's like it's like a Clockwork Orange kind of, we're trying to condition people's brains, maybe like they see it as a positive thing, like we're trying to make humans used to not expressing these like outright commandments kind of element to it all. But I feel like we need more explanation, and it needs to not just be like when it slips, it should feel like a big deal as opposed to just the first scene that we have.
Right.
Yeah. I think also I think making it no makes it a little more difficult than if they had made it a pejorative word, right? Because I think on some level they're using it also as kind of a discussion about pejorative words within society, right? Because you can definitely take that and kind of make the similarities, right? Because I think definitely right away I was like, yeah, there are words that like some people can't use and some people can use, right? And that resonated with me. But I think that like because a word like no is so simple, and because a word like no means power, right? And the power to say no is sometimes taken away from people. I think that it becomes like a little hard for us to wrap our mind around it. But that's why it's also kind of brilliant that they used the word no, because like for a really long time, no was something that the apes could not use, and no is something that was taken from them, but no was also something that was always said to them. And so like in that way, no is very powerful. And the fact that they have built a society where they can say no now, they have the power to say no now, but no one else can tell them no, right? As a woman of color, that resonated really heavily with me because women are often told not to say no. And we have to come up with other kind of ways of expressing ourselves, or sometimes we face kind of, not so friendly replies or even violence. And so I think like if there were a society where we'll just, I will drop the intersectionality and I'll just keep it lady based just to simplify it. But like if we lived in a society where I could say no to men, and they would have to accept it, and they could never say no to me, but they had to think of clever ways to work their way around it. That sounds amazing to me about right now.
Yeah.
So in a way, like I kind of get what the apes are saying. I can say no, you can't. Like we've got to flip-flop it. Is it fair? No. It is not equitable, and it is not actually what Caesar wants, but it's part of the thing that Caesar needs to get over, and society, if they want to live together as, this utopia that he thinks he wants to live in with apes and humans living side by side, that's part of the gray area that Caesar himself and everyone there would have to get over. But it needs to take there needs to be time before that can actually happen, because the apes that are there, right, they're so fresh to the actual feeling. But why it's also brilliant is that by not allowing humans to say no, if Caesar doesn't accept the change and he continues to or not, if he, right, and he continues to let them deny humans the ability to set boundaries, you end up in the original timeline.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how you end up with slave humans, because you're in this space where you're like, oh yeah, no, you just can't say no because it's something that we're very sensitive about. And like, eventually, right, you would have to work it into a thing that where someone could still reject you.
Yeah.
And they could reject you like in a more sensitive way. And then after you understood each other, maybe because no is not necessarily pejorative, no could work its way back into a relationship between ape and human. But without the ending, without General Aldo doing us the favor of being an absolute punk and being a murderer, Caesar would have never realized that what he was doing was still leading them down the same path. And humans not being able to say no would have led us back to the future in the wheel that we needed to be, because not being able to say no means that even sometimes excuses don't mean no. And sometimes then people just, that means that you can't say anything and you get taken advantage of. And, 20, 30 years, 40 years down the line, servitude. So I think like in some ways, like, yeah, I understand, like, it's really weird, but I kind of think that on some level, it's also brilliant.
Yeah. Because I think you're making a really strong point in terms of if it was a really well established, like, this is how we're trying to lead people into a more conversational way of speaking with each other, or more accepting way of speaking to each other, and not having these like strict like commandments towards one another. But I mean, part of it is the compressed timeline here, I think, is also like playing against it, because like how long, like, these apes weren't even like I'm not, obviously being enslaved for any stretch of time is terrible, but like they at most they were enslaved for like 20 years before the Night of Fires, based on like the timeline of just that we know of here. So like there's kind of that going on there. And then, like I said, it would just be nice to sort of like explain how no specifically was set up that way beforehand. It's because it like you said, a pejorative, like, even if it was just like bad ape or something to that effect, like, okay, that feels like it's specifically a thing being said to these apes. But like, I have to imagine that no was just one of many things that were said to apes routinely. I don't know. Like I said, I just wish that they had set it up more before all of a sudden, like, oh, the teacher said no, out of instinct, in a very rational or, very normal.
They should have had a kid ape and a kid human dealing with that early, so we could see it in like a safe space to understand the functionality of it. Because I want it to stay. I love the idea of it.
I think what you could do is you could have the first scene with the teacher, and I think it'd be actually really interesting to have it happen between Caesar and McDonald. Like McDonald forgetting himself and saying, no, that's not, and then Caesar being like, and having a tension between two people who are actually friends. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And Caesar, who didn't fully experience everything. Like, while he did go through a period of time being a slave, like, he grew up under the control of Armando, like Ricardo Montalban's character. So, like, he would be the one who would be the least scarred by it.
Right.
So he could say, like, because we're together and it's quiet, or no one else is here, and, like, I'm me and you're you, and we are friends, and, like, it has not cut me the way it has cut, so many of the people outside these walls. Like, if it was like, in his cabin or whatever, like, that would, that'd be a good setup. And then, like, do a rule of three. Because I think, like, the classroom scene should be like the break into two.
Yeah.
Or like the action that leads to the break into two, like that leads to Caesar having to decide to go out. Because it kind of does.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just that this movie is fucking 90 minutes for its extended cut. Like,
yeah.
It was the extended cut that I watched for this episode as well, so I'm more endeared to that version.
Yeah. It's surprisingly better without being really, like, it's only 10 minutes longer.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a ton of stuff is added, but it's just enough, like, just enough mortar scenes, like, between, like, here's all the bricks that we're laying out, like, here's how it connects, and, like, the stuff with the Doomsday Cult is better set up in the extended cut. It's still real fucking fast. It's like 95 minutes.
It's got a lot to show us. Got a lot to talk about.
Anyway, that was just like a thing that kept, because it's such an early scene, like, we get the lawgiver, we have 5 minutes of footage from the previous movie, and then we have like 3 minutes of just like General Aldo riding on horseback before he goes to the classroom, and then like it jumps in. Like, I like that classroom scene up until that point. I really like when Cornelius II makes a joke making fun of gorillas, and all the gorillas laugh in agreement because they also agree. Like, oh no, we would totally just be like practicing riding and shooting. Like that's how we are, right? Yeah. Like that felt like a fun bit. Yeah.
Well, and that's little character development for Cornelius to show what kind of a leader he would have become had he survived the story. Like, it was really cool of them to seed that like he was really studying his father to follow in his footsteps, and so that's like proof of good environment being useful for the like continuation of peace. Like, he is the core of the like soul of the movie, and so him dying at the end is another reason that I think it's so nihilistic.
Speaking of extended cuts, this episode is about to become one.
Yeah, we should get into it.
I would like to say before we went on air that I was told that I needed to bring the A game. So,
wow. I'm gonna tell you right now before we go to commercial break, you can bring whatever game you want. Like, you don't have to bring A games. We're cool. We're very cool people.
That's easy for you to say. You're the one who said that he needed to bring the A game.
I did? Oh crap! It was me. Sorry. I take it back, but I don't. That was a different timeline.
Yeah.
That's true.
We swerved into a different lane.
We broke the wheel of time, and now we're going off into all of our C game pitches.
Yeah.
Either way,
that's when I chose violence. Now I choose peace.
All right. Either way, we need to take a sidestep in time. We're going to hear some ads from some of the other great shows on our network, and when we come back, we're going to have some pitches.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't Screen Beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not...
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans!
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
You will be mine.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Jeff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
And we're back. All right, so we have talked a lot about all the quantum possibilities of the battle for the Planet of the Apes. But why don't we focus on what we think our preferred quantum reality would be? So, Seth, here's the deal. I am not allowed to go before Sam. That is the one rule that we've got. So you, Seth, as the guest, would you like to take the first swing, or would you like Sam to take the first swing?
I'm curious to hear what Sam had. We got a little taste of it earlier, and it piqued my interest. And I'm going to keep mine on the shorter side in the middle, because I feel like you and I, Case, may have landed on some similar things, and so maybe I might be a good supplementary writer to you on this. So I'll let Sam go first. I'll kind of like dump my couple ideas, and then we can jump into yours and see if mine fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And this can totally be collaborative, because I kind of feel like everyone's kind of going to merge into something. Because you said before that you wanted to be a little more political. And my thing is, as much as I connect with General Aldo and sympathize with him clearly, I didn't actually know that I would become such a villain apologist until I started doing the show, because I definitely end up finding ways to be like, well, but I really feel like the motivation for this villain was this. But I really liked his character. I thought this was a good performance overall. I think that I wanted to see a little more of like a sneaky usurping, right? Like he's not good necessarily at the writing and the philosophy, right? But where he excels, where this intelligence is, because there's different types of intelligence, right? And we often like to pretend that there's just like Aristotle sitting on it, but there's different types. So this is what this gorilla is good at. He's good at warfare. He is good at being sneaky. He's good at being stealth. He is, I'd make him a little sneakier. I'd make him a little less like bombastic. Like I'd make him bombastic in front of people with his false pride and puffing up his chest. Cause I think that's very gorilla. I think like that's very like what we kind of think about when we think about gorillas. And I would keep that, but I would keep kind of like underneath it all, this like very sly conniving. I would basically make sure that he's a true version of like Brutus or someone from the Roman court that could actually like take Caesar on. Maybe not when it comes to like, you know, writing or philosophy, but when it comes to waging war. And then again, I have limited time, right? But let's say I had some time. I might build out a little bit of the loyalty with him and his guerrilla squad, and I would make it so that they who suffered, especially, definitely longer than Caesar, were basically picking off the remainder of humankind, people who had scattered, who weren't necessarily living in the community, you know, showing him being aggressive to the humans in the community, disrespectful, but like biding his time with them because Caesar is he's towing the line. He lives in this community, but anyone who's not in the community's protection, what Caesar doesn't know about. And so I would make that the reason why it's so much easier for the cultists to continue, for the cult leader to keep people in check, right? Because if you leave here, if you go outside, I can't offer you protection. Here we have weapons. Here we have all the things that can protect you. And so building those two elements out, because that is a big struggle of what Caesar has to deal with here, right? Because it's not just within his society, which is already fragmented, but having General Aldo play an even more fracturing role in the fact that he's actively fracturing outside of their community, right? Which is like really devious of him, because there's no way for new humans to find their settlement and find salvation. And so he's sowing discord in the region, which again, that's kind of equals into the issue we've been having, or one of the issues we discussed, is that we don't really get the sense that there's much more than what there is, right? And we can do this with a couple of shots kind of at night, because I would assume that he and his squad would go out when they would be least watched by the rest of the community. And you can do it in shadow with a couple of different extras that you don't really see. You can use the same couple of guys with different clothing, actually, and kind of have them like coming back with new objects, right? Like, no, we just found this. We went on raids, but they're actually like killing people and taking their shit, and they feel like it's stuff that they're owed, right? That they're owed this for their slavery, and so. I think that will make it more interesting, because then when Caesar and his little trio, which I get, it's a small group, right? Want to go in. When they go into the cultist area, they're already used to being preyed upon, and so then they're more alert and trying. And they're wondering what the fuck they're doing in there, but it doesn't matter. Like they're here to annihilate us, right? And this allows the cult leader to mobilize them enough to be like, no, we need to take the fight to them. And I think that is enough motivation to kind of set off the war that needs to to like for that little war that happened. Again, I understand they didn't have a lot of money, they didn't have a lot of extras, but I think with a little like nighttime shooting, things like that, you can use the same humans whose skin is falling off to be the people that they're doing. And I think it just adds a little more of like that political intrigue to it. And then because of that, I would cut down on some of the longer scenes where like I would put a little more story in and a little less shooting in. I don't need all of the explosions. And specifically, I mean like when they're escaping from the city. Like I feel like they should probably be in hot pursuit, but I don't need that scene to be quite as long as I'm getting more story. Because again, we're paying for frame.
Right.
So like I'm trying to work within the budget constraints. And I would like to expand on the no. I'd like to give one scene of the no. Maybe I would cut back on some of the this is what happened in previous just so that I could have a scene where Caesar reiterates or explains to his friend again why even to him, because to his people it's hurtful, that he would prefer his friend not say it. And what it means, and his friend kind of challenge him on that because he's a friend. And hearing the challenge, I think that would make that sit better and it would be more interesting. And I'm trying to work with my limited time, and because like I only have 90 minutes, right? And
well, that's just what it ended up being. Like the bigger issue is you're working with your limited budget.
Yeah, so I would be like nighttime, that kind of thing. Just a couple of those. We already have the horses. We'll just do it the same day. And then we shoot the sabotage scenes the same time we shoot the little war scene. and then I would basically, oh man. See, I really would like the fight to be fixed because focusing on just the knife and then just being like the implication of Aldo falling off was just kind of lame to me. And like that's like something that I really wish I could fix. And I don't know how I would fix it in the era, in those costumes, on a tree branch, other than maybe like
less wides. That's the start. Like more close-ups.
Close-ups, and maybe have the knife jab and then have an arm like basically push it away and then then you hear the sound of falling. So like maybe Caesar
basically it needs to be the end of Disney's Tarzan.
Yes, that's what it needs to be.
Okay,
yes.
Like that's how that fight needs to go.
Yeah, thank you. You fixed it. So yeah, I would basically fix that, and I'm fine with the ending the way that it ended. I'm fine with all the messages with the disarmament and anti war and all of that stuff. So I'd keep all that stuff. And yes, I would let Caesar's son die because I think that it's important for him to want to face Aldo because of that. And I would have him face the realization. So those are my main changes, just to make the front of the movie a little more interesting for me, and give a little more depth to why humans join cults.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I know it's easy for us to join cults, but why stay in radiation? and also to give General Aldo, I think, the respect that he deserves, and give him the propensity and the skill to actually be someone who is sly and conniving and calculating, even if he can't. Because I think there are plenty of people who can't read and can't write, but can definitely still politically handle other people. And I think that should be acknowledged. And General Aldo can be their hero. And that's my pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nail a huge thing that as soon as you said it out loud, I'm like, oh my God, that exactly. Like, it needs to be darker. Like, there's so many, I was thinking this when I was watching the movie, but like, I wasn't thinking how I would do it. Just like, oh, it's weird that everything is daytime. Because they do have a couple night shots in there. Like, there are the night shots when Cornelius II goes out and like overhears Aldo is like murdered or, wounded and then dies later. So like you could easily have like guerrillas riding on horseback with like torches and then save money on costumes because like you're getting the silhouettes for some of these people.
Yeah.
You could easily have like much cheaper masks and whatnot on the ones riding it. And that could be a really scary visual. And I think that the idea of them going out raiding does a really good job of sort of being one of the two solutions for like what's going on with the mutants. Like the other one Seth said earlier, what if they were trapped already, like, and like the apes coming actually like freed them. But either one of those I think works perfectly fine. And the idea of like the apes being out there, like building off of that, like what if the whole extended riding sequence was them like capturing humans and dragging them back? And that sort of sets up like why there are humans there in the first place. And you can set up like that the policy is like, okay, we found humans out in the wild and we brought them into our society and like asked them to join us. And then you could do a setup for like the world that you're in. And then you can explain like, okay, and this is how the apes, like eventually the gorillas get worse. You know, they start becoming, you know, like the shot of them imprisoning everyone. I thought it was a really good shot in the movie that we got. Like build on that and, you know, have them already have this role of being like, you know, like rounding up all the strays that are out there in the world and bringing them in, and it becomes more violent. And eventually you could see how it would turn into the apes of the future.
Yeah, because I think also like, you know, I think that like in like what the question we asked at the top of this, you know, that Seth asked at the top, did he earn that title of general? Well, in my version, yeah, he has that title. It is his title, and he is a general, and he does go out and he does do these raids and he does bring people back, and some people he doesn't bring back, and that's he starts to undermine Caesar, which is very common, right? Like throughout literature, where a king will have a trusted, you know, you have a man to advise you, and then you have a man for a weapon. That's like very like not even just like Western media. That's also like in other types of media. They'll like, and then someone will decide that they're like, wait, but I'm your arm. Like when you want violence done, you send me out. Why am I listening to you? Like I'm clearly the hand that does it. Like you say, but I'm what does it. So like I'm the hand that should be doing. So what if I'm in the position and oh my gosh, Case, this is where you can have oh God, I'm gonna forget his name again. Virgil be kind of evil because he can lead, like he can basically philosophically be just like, well, you're just serving a new master, aren't you? Like he can totally worm tongue that whole thing.
Yeah,
like,
you're kind of getting to where my pitch is going to go.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. That's why I just didn't like chime in on that part.
I'm sorry. It just like I was like,
no, again, we're kind of all building this because like we are stuck with a $1.7 million budget. Like there's only so much. You know, when we did like the Star Wars movies, it's like they could fucking do anything.
Yeah.
They could have been anything about anyone, with anyone.
Right.
Like they could hire any actor. This is a very tight budget. We are very stuck with like some things, and so like I think anything that we're working with is still going to be kind of close to the original in some way. And I think we agree. There's good ideas. So it's like just how do you like take those ideas? And
there's some fleecing together to happen, and we don't even do the budget and time period stipulations on my show. So this is like extra hard mode. But it's. All right, can I
wait, I want to say one last thing.
Please.
So I don't step on your tongue. So instead of having Virgil do it, I don't have a worm tongue thing. I have McDonald stepping out of line and General Aldo basically telling him what his place is. And because he's pissed off, McDonald says something to him of being like, well, we all serve Caesar, don't we? And then walks away. And that's what sparks in General Aldo that he needs to like, wait, he's right. I'm actually under someone's thumb and I shouldn't have to be. Because that would make him more angry if a human said it to him. All right.
And honestly, you could have a why not both here. So I think that all works. I think that all works great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seth, your turn.
Okay. I need more of the budget back to do what I want to do. And I don't know if this breaks the rules of the show at all, but if it's me,
you can go for a bigger budget, but you would have to say if you're a producer, how would you?
No, I'm sticking within the. I'm aiming to stick within the budget for this. I don't know if what I'm about to suggest will break the rules of the show. I don't need the mutants at all in this story whatsoever.
Okay.
I think we could get everything that we want out of a couple adjustments to the A story. We can keep aspects from the mutant outing if we need to, but as I watch the movie and as I listen to what we're landing on, so my pitch stems off of I wanted to follow down the like Moses analogy stuff, so I wanted to go really Israelite with it, And so I looked into some biblical law, and I thought it'd be really cool if our movie is in this setting about 40 years in the future, giving us a little extra timeline to mess around with stuff. Caesar will be much older, so he's a wizened, older Moses leader, and they're about to enter into a 7-year time of Jubilee, is what it was called in the Bible. And basically, this is the changing of the guard. This is the part where they're about to allow humans the same access levels as apes. And so the rule of no is about to change, allowing humans onto the war council is about to change. Like all of the stuff that is called out as issues within their society across this movie, I want to make that the plot points. I want to make all of that what is inhingent to what's happening to the story. So basically, Caesar declared that after 40 years of integration, humans sharing their knowledge, apes sharing their philosophy, integrating society, overseen by the gorillas. This is important. The gorillas have overseen this entire system just to make sure that there was no human uprising. We could even reference maybe there was a previous human uprising or something like that. So anyway, the gorillas have had the power for the last 40 years, and now basically they're being told that you are going to give some of the guns and some of the access and some of the stuff over to humans. And we get I said I want to lean into political intrigue. I want Virgil to be a straight worm tongue that is trying to turn this back around to put him on top of the gorillas, and then negate this year of Jubilee, or the 7 years of Jubilee that Caesar's going for. I don't have a better term for it, so I'm just going to use the biblical term for now. So I think like a Dune style changing of the guard. This is, the Atreides coming to Araxis and taking over. And Caesar's overseeing all of this. He's like maintained this kind of Paul Atreides top level where he's overseeing this, and he kind of is burdened with this job and watching the changeover, because I liked, like I mentioned before, I like that he has this man that is his conscience within his order. Like I love that he kind of takes these metaphors and literalizes them. So I'd love to see him literalizing that for humans across this like changeover period. And this is what leads to the battle for the Planet of the Apes. It's the finale, sans mutants, is going to be kind of the humans and the chimps working together to stop this like overthrowing this kind of underhanded political move within their. And this is the other part. I want to establish that this is the only society left on Earth. This is it. They've been out. They've explored. Nothing else is out. The humans have wiped themselves out, and it was the peacekeeping of the apes with humans that kept them safe in their environment. So they kind of became the protogenitors of this future ape society. So that's kind of bigly where I would go in and strip pages out of the script and be like, hey, let's focus in on this A plot, the stuff at home. Locationally, you really don't even need to change that much. Like the fact that they live in an oasis utopia in the middle of the desert, I say play into that. Like the apes or the gorillas are sick of having protected the borders out in the sands. They're ready to come in and like have all of the lush greenery around them, but there's fucking humans everywhere, and they hate them because they've been staving off maybe mutant humans from this area. If you had to keep the mutants, you could do that where they're out on their rides protecting the humans from mutants. If you have to have it, but I don't even, if we need to send Caesar out of the plot to go find the video of his parents and come back with that knowledge to affect change, that can stay, and you can have maybe the machinations of Virgil being played out while he's gone if you wanted to do like an A-B plot in the middle there. Because I like the stuff that they landed on, having the mutants talk about like who attacked first. You could have the gorillas have that exact same conversation with amongst themselves. I don't think the idea doesn't have to be specifically the mutants delivering it. You could have the gorillas fighting that out amongst themselves while Caesar talks to his wife about it, so you still have the same contrasting bits there. I want to keep the ideas of the movie rolling. I think I really want to focus on like, what is it about this society that is causing all of this turmoil and upheaval that might lead to just repeating slave states into the future.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, going with that scenario, if Caesar actually goes into the irradiated city and the mutants are there, but they are in secret, they're literally you catch them like spying on the apes as they move through, but never actually confront them or anything to that effect. You still get that setup for like, oh, there's a secret society of mutants living underground without actually having to deal with it. And I get from a budget standpoint, the rationale was like, all right, it's easier to have these people be our antagonists because they're humans with just like some minor makeup as opposed to anything else. But I like that idea. I especially like the bigger time jump there. I think that does a lot because that also like kind of resolves like, why are they all so smart already?
Yeah.
And you can have, a young Cornelius within this story still. I think there's a space for, a kid to be kind of, I would like him to be our audience POV more than anything, as he's learning about this greater society that he lives in and why they have the rules they have. He can functionally explain things to the audience like we're his age, and then we see, and once we get the nugget of that, seeing that playing out in the bigger field with the adults, it's like, oh, okay, he's just being taught the way that they're fucking things up, kind of. And
yeah, also he's so young that he's the newer generation.
Yeah, he doesn't carry any of that trauma with him.
Yeah.
I mean, there'll be some generational trauma, but he won't. He'll have lived in a society where he's known good humans more so than anyone else. I mean, yes, Caesar had his, but I mean, like the other apes, he will have been raised by his father, who knew someone who cared for him, who and then been around humans who care for him. So he will be more sympathetic than some of the others.
Yeah, and my thought too of adding that time in, it could be his grandson. You know what I mean? Like Cornelius could be a grandson in that situation, just to show how quickly one generation in between things can jump and diverge. That like maybe the old guard of apes that knew the human society previously, maybe there's not many of them left. And so now you're getting into a society that is fully assumed to itself. Like these people were born into a whole generation born into their own society that are now running things based off of their experiences instead of the struggles that the previous generation with Caesar had gone through. I like the idea that they're kind of holed up in that little oasis, like they've been. I really want to push into that.
Yeah, I think that the fact that it's so lush and green for so much of the movie does not sell the nuclear winter that the world.
Those matte painting cutaways. I mean, they're nice looking, man. But
yeah, no, I like that. I think that works for a lot of it. It would still be a shorter movie. Like I don't think you could we're not ending up with a very fleshed out part just because there's only so many players involved and that you can have the money to have good looking makeup for and so
exactly. Yeah, I wanted to work with just the characters that we had within this already, because honestly, really the way they should have gone with this is like a Tombstone thing. It should have been like we're just so disconnected from any of this that we're just meeting all new characters and how they're dealing with this future. And that kind of, if you're going for an Oasis setup, I guess I'm
like a really old Caesar, and that's the only character that's
exactly yeah.
I mean, I do really like that take where you go that much further, because I think that also addresses one of the issues, which is that Roddy McDowall is both a little bit older at this point and also just a human, and so is not going to be doing the really acrobatic kind of stunts you would expect an ape to be doing. Even his son character has some swinging scenes that we just never get Roddy McDowall doing, and that's a limitation of just what you can do with your lead actor when they're just an adult male, as opposed to something with the agility that far exceeds anything humanity has to offer.
Something I think the Tim Burton version did pretty well was the wire work and making it believable that these guys could have these strengths and abilities.
Some of it, they went a little too far. Some of the jumps are a little insane, but yes, I agree. Yeah, again, man, if you had the Tim Burton production values on this,
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
God, even just this script, it would be so much more interesting than what we got. Well, I like both of yours, because I was going a little bit closer to the original, what we had, and not deviating quite as far forward in the future. But I do really like that, and that timeline I think helps some of it. So you could work with that too, for what I was kind of thinking. My big thoughts were, as we're all kind of going, Virgil is like a worm tongue. Like, I think that he should be the shit starter in this whole thing. You know, I think Mendemus kind of fills the role of like Maurice in the more recent movies. And like, if he had been sort of the orangutan that Caesar would go to like sort of confide in, and it's like, oh, but you have a new advisor now. Virgil is the lawgiver now, or Virgil is, or the lawkeeper, or something to that effect. You know, and that sort of speaks to the change in the role of orangutans over time, where at first they are writing down the dictates of Caesar. At this point, and Caesar is the one setting forth everything, and in the future they will be presenting themselves as this iconoclastic force controlling what everyone thinks. Like that, it's like, no, you cannot think any way than the way that we set out for you all. You know, because I think they're like that intersection of how political forces work with each other in the original Planet of the Apes is so fucking cool. And like, ultimately, Seth, like, what you're pitching is a defund the police movie. You know, like, the gorillas are the police in this scenario that have gotten, you know, they took a position of authority based on a need to establish peace. Like, they became this like military control, and then relinquishing that authority is the thing that they're having a difficulty with in your pitch. And I think that that's really cool. You know, I don't know if America was ready to have that conversation then. It's certainly not now. But it's at least like in our lexicon to like even talk about it. So I think that's really cool. And I think you can do it that way, or you can keep the mutants as like an additional player. And, you know, if like Caesar is the thing that is different in this timeline, like if his presence is why they might not go into a direction of pure violence, I think that could be kind of interesting.
I love the mutants as a cautionary tale of like, look what the humans did to themselves, homie. Like, this is not cool. Yeah.
Well, and building off of that in the second movie, establishing like, oh yeah, no, some did hide away. Like, I thought was at least an interesting element of that movie. Like, you know, it does kind of like make you question some of it, but like, no, it's if the apes have had the run of things, that makes enough sense. And in your scenario where we don't even like have the mutants as players, and they're just like literally like hiding in the darkness when apes move through their space, because like they are so devastated and so scared of the outside world, and that plays into their xenophobia that eventually will be magnified by the time we get to the future timeline. Awesome, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I love anything we can do in this movie to like play up like where we're going to get to in the later movies, or rather earlier movies later in the timeline. Man, that's wild to talk about. My big thoughts are, so Virgil is like a worm tongue type character who's like manipulating things. And then in that regard, I actually think Aldo should be more sympathetic at the beginning, and then push too far. I feel like he should be like a Macbeth type if Virgil is like a Lady Macbeth here. Because like when he first like arrives in the human camp and like helps pick up the like wagon so that they can put the wheel on and stuff, I feel like those are moments where the gorillas should sort of gravitate towards these positions that are kind of the manual labor positions out of a pride that they are so strong and that they are so capable.
Yeah. Okay.
And that they should be motivated to assert military power by way of the orangutans, who are not as strong in the scenario, and are not as capable of like fully usurping these roles. And then when they actually like grab for power and like actual like political power, that should be motivated by like Virgil being like, but you are so strong. You've been the one who's been protecting our borders for so long. Like, kind of thing. And then like, and Virgil shouldn't actually have a comeuppance at the end of the movie, I don't think. I think Virgil should then rat out Aldo at the end the same way that he does. But in this scenario, it's like, it should have been, he's been holding that information and now he reveals it to everyone, you know? And like, Virgil should be the whole time positioning himself to be the one in power, the one actually controlling. I think that's really good there. But I also think that all of the apes need to be dumber. I think that them being as sophisticated as they are, especially ones like Virgil, where like we're talking about like physics, I think is crazy. Like, regardless of like how smart they could possibly have become in this interim, if it's the nuclear radiation, if it's some virus from the future from a different movie that hasn't come out yet, like whatever. But it doesn't make sense that they would have the grasp of subject matter. Even if they're smart, it doesn't make sense that they would have like when Virgil is talking and Caesar says like, can you explain that in terms that even Caesar could understand? I'm like, fucking hell, man, you're supposed to be the smartest ape.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
And like, I feel like that's a place for Cornelius as well, as the only direct offspring of this lineage of future apes. Like, Cornelius should have been like the bright future for them, like the last, like the next in the line of these like innately smart apes as opposed to the ones that are in the process of being uplifted. And I feel like he should have more burden to be the leader by virtue of the fact that like he is so stellar compared to all the other apes. Like, I think it makes sense for them to be smart, I think, like, or like working their way, but I just don't think that they should have, you know, like it should be more like broken English kind of speech for all of them, especially the gorillas. Like the speech Aldo gives about guns
Love that.
and like how that's important, that actually feels like the right cadence for where the apes should be. You know, they're articulate enough that it's not like painful to listen to for the audience. I don't think we were at a point yet where we were going to do a whole sign language movie here. Like that just wasn't going to happen. That said, if you're watching Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and you can turn off the subtitles, it's a fucking amazing time. You'll thank me for it. But like you know, we just weren't there here in 1973 going to do a whole sign language movie. Like that just wasn't going to happen. So like have broken English, but don't have the language be so complex that we have jokes about how someone is smarter than Caesar. Like that doesn't make sense. Like have Caesar be like very smart, and that's why he thinks he's got the right idea, but it's being reinforced by the fact that he's talking to people who are struggling to keep up with him. And I think that that's a scenario that would allow for his hubris to be even further, that would have the tragedy of Cornelius dying be even more profound, because now like the idea of Caesar having no heir is actually really cool, because then you're like, oh, well, but now they don't have this steward to sort of like shine them on the way. Now, in terms of outfits, how do you make that work? I think you keep the jumpsuits from the previous movies. I would love to have long hair on these apes. Like,
oh, yeah.
Like the apes all have this like slick back design. I would love this to be the opportunity to have like just a little bit more fur coming down on their shoulders and stuff. And I would feel like it would make them feel a bit more feral. And helps sort of sell this whole thing. It's feral in a different way than the way apes actually look, but I think it would read that way to the audience without it being a big, expensive addition. You know, we're just talking about extensions on the masks that they already have.
Yeah.
Sam,
hair's expensive, though. Go on.
This is true, but they already have the hair on the mask part. It's just the extensions part to make it like a bit longer. Sam, I love your idea about like them being sort of on the border and whatnot. I think like I was like kind of tackling how I wanted to handle the mutants and whatnot on this one. I wasn't quite positive on like what, because I was thinking like, well, maybe the mutants are like scoping out gorillas or Ape City or whatever it's called at the beginning of the movie. And I'm thinking like, well, no, actually I like this idea of the gorillas just being out there like rounding up stragglers. Like you could open with it being like a really harsh desert kind of environment, and like a person wandering and starving and whatnot, and then all of a sudden like a gorilla nets them and drags them back to this ape city, and they're like actually like shown compassion and whatnot, and you can set up this whole like this like dichotomy of like these like aggressive, violent actions of the gorillas to like capture people, and they see it. You know, this is the cop conversation. Like they see it as being like for the greater good, for order, for peace. Right. They're rounding up like these random people, but they're doing it painfully, and then like it's then all of a sudden on the chimps and the humans and the orangutans to like, you know, smooth things over with these people. But this is how you could introduce like maybe somewhere in Act 1. After not the first person, but like a person later on, they capture, and that's a mutant from the city, and it could be like they finally broke free, or they've been every now and then like, you know, we reveal like, oh well, like we know of you, like your raiding parties capturing anyone who like walks through, and we can kind of set up this idea that the gorillas have been the scary force for the humans in there. It kind of becomes I Am Legend.
Yeah, a little bit
at that point.
Yeah.
And I actually like that. Like as I say it, I'm like, ooh, I like this idea. And it's funny
because of
because
the
it's
Omega
the same
Man
writers
stuff,
as the Omega Man, which is then an adaptation of I Am Legend.
Perfect.
Which means it actually feels like it's something that could have happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that like I think that could be kind of a cool vibe there, and that sort of creates a natural catalyst for if this mutant from the city is being like you've been raiding our people, you've killed so many, it's like, oh, you have people, like where? Oh, in like you mean in the city? And then all of a sudden McDonald's like, oh shit, there might be still functional things there. Like we thought it was all bombed out, but if they're saying like the lower levels are intact, we actually could access like all this stuff. Like we could find your parents.
Or the Fremen.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh.
Oh yeah, Caesar's trying to make deals with the mutants for their stuff down in the cities. He's trying to establish trade routes. That would be so. Oh yeah. Okay. All right. This is the big budget version though. I'm pitching stuff we can't keep
that is the
up
big
with.
budget version.
I mean, honestly, like even on that end, like you could have the person like you can have McDonald's say like there's all this information down there. and be like very interested in he and Caesar and even like Virgil, right? Because like he's kind of worm-tonguey and knowledge is power and he knows that. Be interested in what's down there. But what General Aldo hears is that because the guy can also say it, that they have weapons. And so what he hears is threat.
Yeah.
And so you have like a diverging of like, you know, differences of opinions in this government between the arm of justice, of violence, of the law, of the general versus like this, like these intellectual people who are standing on the other side of Caesar being like, oh, we need to get the knowledge. And General Aldo can be like, no, we need to fucking destroy that place. They have weapons. Like they're humans with weapons. Like it's different having humans here who are like helping us farm and living here under our protection and our control that are not allowed to say no to us. But it's different having a colony of humans with weapons. And whether or not that guy is telling the truth, it doesn't matter. He said it like, oh, we have weapons, like because he's afraid.
Yeah.
And that can set like a schism between all of them, which Virgil can play like both parts to.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I was going to say Virgil then could be the one like Virgil could put that seed in Aldo's ear.
Right.
Well, I think Aldo is going to think it no matter what because of his experiences.
But really play it up.
But I feel like Virgil can be like, no, I understand you. I understand you more than Caesar understands you. But we need to let him go in and get the information and you can come with us. And if something goes wrong, you know, and kind of had that kind of like, you know, there's always, you know, in all those great movies, there's always one loose cannon, right?
Right.
This goes back to Aliens. There's always one loose cannon that does something that they're not supposed to do and sets off the shitstorm that shouldn't happen. And so you can still have some of the violence that happens and like the spurning of like the group if you want to still have that part and you can have that, you know, because you send Aldo or he sends apes with them who then like won't let the diplomatic things happen. And and then you've got a war because it's still based in fear.
Yeah, because I picture it being like Virgil is like Loki in the first Thor movie whispering into Aldo, who is Thor in this scenario, being like, Caesar knows what's best for us, even if there is a threat. But you and I, we know that the humans can't be trusted. If they have weapons, they'll come for us. Like, throw that out there. Like, one thing I think is in the movie, but not really played enough with, is this idea that all the mutants are really sick from all the radiation. Like, I think it'd be interesting if like either they're in a safe area like below, but if they come out, they'll get like sicker from all the radiation, or like the upper layers are radioactive, but like down below, or like maybe if the radiation itself is like, I don't know, like there's a vibe of like almost like you're going to be trapped there because you'll eventually need the radiation. Like when he says we'll become permanent residents, and like that doesn't make any sense with science. So maybe it is like, oh, you have to be all the way down and you can't like pass through this area without getting like increasingly sick, and you just never recover. Like anyone who moves through the space will like take some kind of damage that is just going to be there forever. And so even like going down into the layers, like the apes are affected by it somewhat, and vice versa. So like that's one of the reasons why the mutants have been like down there for so long, even if they could escape. And it could be that like they only just recently were able to get free, and so previous people had always been like just random human stragglers, versus like the actual mutants or like the actual like survival community at the subterranean group. Either way, I think like playing it up where like I feel like the humans should feel less pathetic in the way that they look in this movie. They all like look a little goofy. Like when they're traveling, all the shots are terrible of them like riding on motorcycles and stuff. It's like none of them know how to do any of the things they're doing. Like the armies are never impressive or anything like that. I think that they need to feel like a scary force, like a weird force that's like gotten really twisted. And like some of that is just me being affected by the later movies, because like War nails it. Like they all have, like I think if they all had shaved heads and like weird marks on their faces and stuff, like that would work better than the weird caps and stuff. But I realized that bald caps cost money, and like you can't pay everyone to shave their head necessarily. So like what are you going to do to make it work here? I don't know necessarily. Maybe make it look a little bit more like fake military than like weird cults at this point, just so that like they can all have like berets on instead of.
I mean, weird
it's
military.
Really it's the caps that they're wearing. Like, that throw me off so much. Like, they look so dumb.
Weird military can also be weird cults. I mean, like, it's fine.
Yeah, like, just sell it a little bit better. And I think, and likewise, like, have some outfits. Like, you can have, like, I said, like, the jumpsuits from before, or maybe some, like, military fatigues. Raid wardrobe departments that aren't just the Planet of the Apes, though. Because the clothing from the future doesn't work here at this time. You can have elements, but having like full on, like all the orangutans are just wearing those goddamn orange robes, like feels like that they have become the aristocracy of the future already, but it hasn't actually gotten there yet. Like, again, this movie is just like has all these ideas it wants to hit, but they're like, well, we've got this one actor who plays this part, and we can't have him be like his grandson also. Like, that'd be a lot. So we want him to be Caesar and not, Cornelius the Fourth or something to that effect. So like the timeline is very compressed, and like they only have so much money, so they have to use it the best they can. But like I like this idea of gorillas on horseback with torches at night, like being really scary, and then you can just have like shitty masks on like all the ones except for the ones up front. You could really sell those better and have that be a truly terrifying visual at the opening. Like this like starving person who just like gets like netted all of a sudden, like dragged by horseback.
Right, yeah. Present it like horror, and then discover through POV with this human that they're actually being like helped.
Yeah,
just have the gorillas not know how to treat people softly.
Right. Yeah.
Just not like it's just like not in their forte. Like, I helped you. Why aren't you thanking me? Yes, you're bruised, but are you getting fed? Yes, you're welcome.
It's K2SO and Rogue One. I'm saving you.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's my general thoughts there, where it's like rewatching this movie, it is surprisingly deeper than I thought it was. Like it's still tied for last for my Planet of the Apes movies, but there are like fun things going on there that I just wish that they could have really gotten onto the screen, because you can see where they wanted to go, and they just are so hamstrung by, again, a $1.7 million budget, which is less than it cost to pay 2 actors on Friends in the last season per episode.
Can I put on my asshole producer hat for a second and pitch an idea? What if we did an animated movie of this story instead of what if we cap-ended it with an animated film? What if I was like an asshole producer that was like, yeah, okay, you guys can finish the story, you can use the script, but you got to animate it. What do you do if this is an animated movie?
Oh, God. I mean, like, I would take kind of what we were talking about and go further. I think that would help so much for like having all the apes look like apes. Like the fact that this it was already kind of bad in the previous one that they didn't look like apes. It like the in the original one, it makes sense that like, okay, they're, it's thousands of years in the future. They have been living in a human-like society. It makes sense that their body posture and whatnot would have changed a little bit over time, for whatever reasons are the justification for their intelligence, but like it makes enough sense. And like the second one is the same rules, and then the third one they've gone back in time, and all the other apes are either a more conventional gorilla in a costume or an actual chimpanzee, like that we actually get in the third movie. So like we know that the chimpanzees look different from the chimpanzees of the future. So when you get to Conquest, it's like it's awkward, and at least they're all hunching and pretending to be sort of
ape-like,
animalistic. Yeah, this one would have been really a good spot for them to be still much more ape-like and on the verge of being like fully ape still.
What about you, Sam? Anything pop into your head when I say animated instead of live action?
A way better Caesar General Aldo fight for sure.
Yeah.
Number one, like,
can you imagine if this was like Primal? Animated in that style.
Like that was like my first thing. I was just like, oh, we could like actually like show like a really good fight, and it would be amazing. And that showdown would still definitely be in it. Absolutely. I mean, I actually like probably would just expand on like what we thought, and then honestly, like, because I do think that fundamentally this film is not that bad. It just has a very low budget, and therefore they skimped on a lot of things. And so if they had more time to kind of let the story breathe a little and kind of expand on some of the plot points, I think it actually would have been a pretty good movie.
Yeah, totally.
I think just the ability to kind of expand on some of the characters, and definitely playing with our pitches and playing with the political nature, because this is really also about like, how do you start a new society?
Right.
And how do you start a new society with people or with creatures that are starting it based on a place of trauma, right? Because all of the apes have just experienced a trauma, even if it's only for 15 years, 20 years. they're still starting from a place. I know, Case, you're going to regret that forever.
I know.
It's
terrible, but is it as terrible?
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. And so they're still starting from this place of hurt and trauma and distrust, right? And so they're trying to learn how to trust each other and be better than what could actually be in store, is basically becoming what they were freed from, right? So I think that on some level, like, that's kind of like such an interesting story that I don't know that other than expanding on it and really tweaking it and putting in some really kick-ass fights and some more acrobatics, which you can totally do easily,
right.
because you don't have to worry about anyone's bodies getting hurt. You don't even have to get stunt people or pay them extra. I think that what it'll allow you to do is be more dynamic with actual physical fighting. And like, not that I would get rid of the guns, because I really like
that's an aesthetic.
Pro anti-gun kind of, right? Like, and I love that, and it's been part of the thing. But I think I personally find more hand-to-hand combat fights more dynamic. I get really bored in shootouts, which is why I'm not a big Western fan. Like I like High Noon and probably High Noon only. And
that's a good one.
So,
that's a good one to hang your hat on.
It is a good one to love it, right? But I think that for me, just watching two guys or watching people hide behind things and then shoot at each other and roll out, that's not very dynamic or interesting to me. You put someone on a wire or have people flip around and throw kicks at each other, and I'm in. Like, I'm totally in. So the apes being animated, you give a chance for them. Yes, they're still going to use the guns, but they're going to be able to use their physicality, and you'll be able to incorporate animal physicality into that, especially because the era's not that far forward, right? So, like, they should still have some more animal-esque body postures,
Totally.
which I would put into the animation, which I think would make it very interesting and dynamic, because you can even show, like, Cornelius, like, as a new generation, walking more upright, doing less ape things, like still climbing around like a kid and stuff like that, and still having those abilities, but you can have him kind of feel a little more detached from those older generations. And I think you do that with animation really well, because you don't have to worry about the posture or even people dying of heat stroke in costumes. Or even like back then, I mean, those costumes are amazing, but there's not a lot of line of sight, right? So I think, like, in a lot of ways, you want to make sure that when your actors are doing any kind of physical work, that they can actually see what they're doing, especially if there would be weapons or something like that, or hand-to-hand combat. And those masks didn't really lend for those too much. I mean, you can get it done, but
it's hard.
But
I
mean, are these really that bad? Like, they're noted for being made so that people can ride horseback and whatnot on it. Like,
yeah, that's true. And you do what is great about, especially like in this film, you can tell that they really left space for the eyes, which is actually kind of why I like the fact that the actors are actually in the costume, even though you're totally right about the basketball players. But because you can read the actors' eyes, like, you really get their expressions. Like, even if the mouth doesn't move as much as we would like it to, which is why it was dubbed, you do read real things in the actor's eyes. And I will say that that's why, when you say, like, this is a great performance, it's because in the eyes there's something,
Yeah.
When Caesar says to Aldo, ape killed ape, you killed my son, and then you see, like, General Aldo's reaction to it, like, oh shit.
Yeah.
You need that. It is real, and that's, kudos to the actors and to the mask makers for leaving space around the eyes so you get those expressions. But yeah, I just think animation in general will free up some of the movement.
Yeah. I also think that animation lends itself towards wide shots.
Totally.
Obviously, drawing out, like, individual soldiers is really rough, and that has only gotten to be a thing you can really do now with, like, computer-generated images. But, like, it's still, like, you can have big, like, cinematic backdrops and have things moving through it in a way that you just, mattes, as good as they can be, are still going to, like, look like a different thing than the human actors moving through it if you were to try to, like, composite those kind of shots. And also, it's, layering it is a bit more difficult when we're talking about, earlier filmmaking techniques. It's not like they were green screening it.
I think about the visual of being able to watch apes like pull apart our old world, but like with their physicality, like hanging off of a bookshelf and reading through, leftover books in a busted out house. Or the image of apes exploring our world and like pulling information out of it because they can literally understand it. That lends itself, I think, a lot to animation.
Yeah. I think would have been really cute, now that we're talking about this, is like having Cornelius kind of go into a sector that's kind of he's not supposed to be in, kind of flipping around and bringing back knowledge and like kind of getting scolded by people. Maybe even have like the general like save him. Like, so that they adds like a layer, because first of all, you add more connection for us as like viewers to him, and then you add like a relationship between them, which makes the betrayal even worse.
Which I love, but I got to tell you though, that is exactly what they do with Koba when they get to Dawn, like Koba and Bright Eyes. Like that is the thing, which is talking about this movie. I'm like, I am also acutely aware that like literally the better version, the better big budget version has been like already.
Yeah, they literally they rescued their own movie.
They split it up into two, and they put a lot of money into it. We got like truly incredible movies. This is what, if you're trying to do an abridged cut of Dawn and War and only had $1.7 million, this is the movie you would make back in the 70s.
Yeah, maybe there was real time travel involved with this.
It's just such a crazy franchise. Like, I can't think of any other franchise that's quite like this in terms of it being like, honestly, this like depressing social commentary thing, but also like, you know what? Sometimes just looking at like people dressed up like gorillas makes you smile. So like, there's like that endearing side to it, but it's also war is hell, man is awful, everything's going to end poorly. Like the cycle of violence and trauma will never be broken. Also time travel.
Yep. Just to complicate things even more.
But I think that we are in danger of traveling back to the beginning and starting this whole process over at this point. I feel like we have talked through quantum circles, and I think that we should probably call it, because we're going to have a lot more conversation about the Planet of the Apes franchise. But this movie being fairly short, and they were kind of like locked into a lot of the stuff they had. Would it have been cool to see a really big budget version of like the Ape City, like if they had like raided like trailer parks and like brought in like mobile homes and stuff and like mixed it in with tree houses and stuff. Like, could have been really cool. They weren't going to do that here. They didn't have the money. like the production values we got are actually kind of impressive. Like you can tell the people that they spent a lot of time on for makeup versus the ones that didn't. There's some shots where I'm like, ooh, why'd you cut to a close for that one? Like that was not the person to do that for. But it's functional, and this movie made $8.8 million. So it, no matter what, made money.
Hand over fist.
And the franchise is beloved for all the weirdness of it. And like, even if it's tied for worst, it's still part of a franchise that I love, and I'm really glad we're talking about it.
I have a hard time disliking movies that swing for the fences like this.
Yeah. Like, you can't get that mad about it because they're still doing something fucking wild. To bring it back to Dune, it's kind of like the David Lynch Dune.
Right.
Like, oh, you took a real hard swing there. That ended up real weird, guys.
I feel like we've done a great job setting the table of like the films to come in this series, because it really is going to touch on everything.
Yeah. Oh, man. And they're all so weird and different and fun in different ways. I think the challenge that this movie had, which I don't think it fully got over, is that the battle part of it, like the sort of like this final conclusion of the war.
Like for the Planet of the Apes,
but the war for the soul, because like the end of Conquest, that could have been the end of the franchise, and it's just like shit's gotten dark. We're going into a bad place. Like everything's going to be the way it was. This movie had to be like an actual like argument about like knowing that the future might end poorly. Can you fix it, or are you stuck with it? And they just didn't have the enough to get over that hump. Because I think that is the interesting part there. Because otherwise, you basically are just like, doing a second round for the rebellion that happened in the movie prior. But like I said, I love this franchise. I'm really glad we're talking about it. Seth, thank you for coming on the show. It has been way too long of us like passing in the night as two gorillas that just didn't have torches lit.
Got to get those torches.
Yeah, so give longer plugs. Who are you? Where can people find all the things you're working on?
Yeah, so the spiel is I run a media company called Montressor Media. We are just trying to make a little bit of everything. Currently, my dream is to get a feature film created. We were able to shoot a really, really cool treatment for it up in Salem over the summer. Case was able to stop through and is in the background of one of the shots himself. That's kind of the project that's occupying all my time right now. If you want to follow the adventures on that, I'm on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram at Seth Decker. You can follow kind of me there and at Montressor Media on those platforms as well if you want to follow the more production end of things. But I tweet about how things are going more often than I tweet about it from the business account, if I'm going to be honest. Yeah, I just we make podcasts on our own network as well. That sub network is called Jaguar Sharks, where we make podcasts about movies. I host one very similar to this show where we pitch rewrites and fixes for movies. We have Split the Difference, where we talk about movies and their remakes and kind of compare and contrast, where the world was at the time and why we got the movies that we got when we got them. And then our last one is called Mind Brain Movies, where we take a psychological look at film and psychology and mental health in film. You can check all of those out on anywhere you get podcasts. So they're on all your major streaming ones.
Yeah. Everyone should check out all of those. I'm so excited for the progress that you guys have been making on just everything and like actually expanding beyond just like podcasts. Like that's stuff that we've talked about and want to do at some point. And, we're doing some stuff with our YouTube channel, but it's great to see, like-minded people like sticking to their guns and actually like making something.
Yeah. It's been fun learning about film so deeply over the last few years of making the podcast that I can even come on a show like this and speak at least somewhat intellectually about this kind of stuff. And to be able to break off and start to make our own movies, that was always the plan. It was always we always wanted to kind of make our own things, and the podcast was just a place to kind of voice that we liked this stuff, just to sound off into the void. It's really exciting watching you guys do the same thing. It's like I recognizing that this isn't. I'm not the only ship out on the water. Just there's a lot of people out here trying to do this the way that we're doing it, and that's really exciting to me. And I get to meet awesome people like you and Sam. It's the best.
I mean, that's truly been the wonderful thing for us as well, like actually getting to interact with so many cool people. And it's been awesome that we've been able to work on this for the last 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's crazy the last 2 years don't count, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Mulligans.
Asterisks those.
Yeah. But we did have episodes come out during that that quantum bubble of no time.
That's an accomplishment too. Anybody that did anything of anything, it just existing through that, you did it. Congratulations.
You're our hero.
Yeah,
that's right. You are, listeners. You're a hero because you stuck with us.
Right.
Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they stay at home and they don't wear pants.
Exactly.
You're a hero.
Exactly.
Sam, if people wanted to find you or follow you, since you are also a hero, where can they do that?
They can find me here with you, Case, and they can possibly sometimes catch me on the Discord if I remember it exists. And then they can't find me anywhere else because I am currently in a traveling circus with my very intelligent little chimp that I am raising to be a proper gentleman and will someday save the world from a fate that is worse than anything. So don't worry, guys. Don't worry. We can change the future with enough love. But if you have any complaints about anything I said or have any comments for me and my chip son, you can find Case at...
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Case Aiken. You can find me on Instagram at Quetzalcoatl5 because I have kept that username since the days of AIM. So check that out. I post stuff about this show, about other stuff going on at Certain POV. You can find work that I've been putting out for the network on our YouTube channel, which is Certain POV Media. So check all that out. Head back over to certainpov.com where you can find so many great shows. Let's give a plug to a cast member of your film, Seth, which is Rachel Quirky Shank, who is one of the hosts of Screen Snark on our network.
Yay, Rachel! Woo!
And co-host to Matt Storm, who is our editor, who we have cited several times in this episode.
We love Matt.
We do love Matt. Matt is great.
As a fellow editor, Matt, I apologize. I know what this beast is.
Yeah.
We are
but we're
almost
gonna
double the length of the movie at this point.
we're going to blame Case like we always do. So don't worry about it, Seth. You don't have to apologize. It's always Case's fault.
Deal.
Oh, yeah, totally my fault. This whole thing is my fault. Let's be clear. This whole thing is my fault. And that is why you should tune in next time, Sam. Unlike what we would normally have, which is sort of a surprise kind of episode, I think we've already covered it. But why don't you say out loud what the next movie we're talking about is?
We're not going to do Highlander 2, The Quickening?
I know, that was on the docket, but we had to make some adjustments because we're working towards episode 150.
Oh, really? So, yeah, actually, everybody, get ready, because we are going to do Conquest of the Planet of the Apes next week. And, yeah, we're going to do it. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Alicea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Matt Storm. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
My main pitch for this movie, frankly, would just be more money. More dollars together, strong.
Yeah, strong, very strong. Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius.
Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius, what's wrong with me?
You can't use any of this, Matt, because,
I don't know. There was an episode of Certain POV that opened with, just before we'd started recording, I just sang the last verse of it, which was, I hate every ape I see, from chimpanzee to chimpanzee. No, you'll never make a monkey out of me. Oh my God, I was wrong. It was Earth all along. You finally made a monkey. Yes, we finally made a monkey. Yes, you finally made a monkey out of me.
Glorious. Wonderful.
Woo! Did we ever
I
clap?
love you, Dr. Zaius.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.